Chapter 1102. As soon as the young Taoist named Yin Lingzi appeared, he attracted the attention of Chu Xiu and Lu Sanjin. Chu Xiu had only met one person who was able to vividly display the Daoist's nature and the word freedom. The Taoist martial artists in the mortal world, whether it was Ling Yunzi or Lu Changlu who were at the mysterious enlightenment realm, had been contaminated by the world of mortals and lost their temperament. Although the old Taoist master was open-minded, he had a strong sense of the world of mortals. It was a kind of temperament that was dyed by living in the world of mortals for a lifetime. As for Zhang Qingzhen, he was a stubborn person. If he did not give up on his goal, he would not be able to live a carefree life for the rest of his life. However, this young Taoist was riding on a donkey as if the Taoist scripture in his hand was the only thing in the world. Lu Sanjin also restrained his momentum. He cupped one hand in the other before his chest and said calmly, "Brother Yin Lingzi of the Lingbao Temple. I heard that you are traveling around the world. After I settle the matter in front of me, you must come to the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a guest." Although Lu Sanjin looked a little frivolous on the surface, he was actually an exceptionally arrogant person. He had entered the true fire spiritual cultivation realm before the age of 30, became the eastern region wayfarer of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, and schemed against a local tyrant like Jianghu. His ability and strength were extraordinary. There were only a few martial artists at the same level as him in the Daoist world who could win his respect. Yin Lingzi was one of them. Yin Lingzi was born with Taoist connotation, and his Taoist heart was not afraid of any inner demons. His talent even attracted the current Taoist master of the Three Pristines Temple to ask him to be his disciple. The Taoist master promised that as long as Yin Lingzi agreed, he would be the next Taoist master. The entire Three Pristines Temple would use all its resources to cultivate Yin Lingzi. However, Yin Lingzi refused such a generous offer, and the reason was very funny. It was because the vegetarian food in the Lingbao Temple was very delicious and he could not bear to leave. If others said this, they would definitely think that they were deliberately teasing the Taoist master. However, Yin Lingzi said it sincerely. In the end, the Taoist master of the Three Pristines Temple could only sigh and leave, which shocked all the Daoist people. Because of this, Lu Sanjin greatly admired Yin Lingzi. Although the Spiritual Treasure Temple was also a large Daoist sect, and its disciples all possessed astonishing battle prowess, and there were even people of the martial immortal level among them, there was still a certain gap between them and the true peak sections. They could only be considered half a peak sect. At the very least, they could not be compared to the Three Pristines Palace, the supreme Daoist sect. If Lu Sanjin were to receive such a promise, he could not guarantee that he would still be loyal to the Imperial Sky Pavilion. At this moment, Chu Xiu was looking at Yin Lingzi as memories flashed through his mind. He was extremely familiar with the word Spiritual Treasure Temple. After a while, Chu Xiu said with a bright smile, "So it's brother Yin Lingzi. I am Chu Xiu. I did not expect to meet an old friend of the Spiritual Treasure Temple when I left the mountain this time. My master once said that my ancestor was very close to the Spiritual Treasure Temple. He even stayed in the Spiritual Treasure Temple for a long time before the Great Ancient Era. However, after entering the Daoist continent, my ancestor became infatuated with martial arts, so he went into seclusion after handing over his inheritance. I did not expect that he would go into seclusion for the rest of his life. I did not expect that we would never meet again." Yin Lingzi's face was also filled with surprise. He said, "Oh, Brother Chu, who is your ancestor? I might have heard of him before. It is fate that the descendants of an old friend can meet again." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I'm sorry. Due to certain reasons, I can't reveal the name of the ancestor of my lineage for now. I have to wait until I defeat the successor of a great enemy and completely wipe away the humiliation before I can reveal my name to the outside world. However, my master once said that before the great calamity of the ancient times, my ancestral master used to live in the Spirit Treasure Temple when he was young. He was fortunate enough to be taught martial arts by the temple master of the Spirit Treasure Temple, Immortal Crimson Afterglow. Reverend Crimson Afterglow was an expert closest to becoming a martial immortal. However, before the Great Ancient Era, he died trying to save the common people. It was truly a pity. There was also Senior Ling Qingzi from the Spiritual Treasure Temple. Back then, he was the eldest senior of the spiritual treasure temple. No matter in terms of strength or character, he was truly admirable. Even my ancestor admired him greatly. My ancestor once said that there were many geniuses in the spiritual treasure temple. He did not record their names and only referred to them by their seniority. At that time, although the second senior of the spiritual treasure temple seemed frivolous, he was extremely talented. The third senior did not like martial arts, but he was extremely talented in formations. Although the fourth senior was a Daoist, he liked to eat meat. The fifth senior liked to drink wine. Even Uncle Chui Wen's cooking was delicious. These people were all good friends of my ancestor. However, all of them died in the great ancient era. They died trying to save people. Only senior Ling Qingzi and the youngest junior survived. My ancestor once said that although the spiritual treasure temple was not a great sect, its breadth of mind was even greater than that of the great sections. It was truly praiseworthy. Chu Xiu had seen many of the stories of the spiritual treasure temple in the Xiaofan heaven and the 6 illusory realms. It was enough for him to fill in the details of the spiritual treasure temple in the past. Lu Sanjin, who was standing at the side, was dumbfounded. Part of what Chu Xiu said was true. The entire Daoist knew about it. However, he did not know most of it. The spiritual treasure temple was very famous among the Daoist sections. It had the least number of people. In the past 10,000 years, including the chefs in the kitchen, there had never been more than 2 digits of people. However, the disciples of the spiritual treasure temple were not inferior to those of the top sections. Almost all of them were the best among their peers. When the light of the spiritual treasure appeared, who could compete with them? In Lu Sanjin's memory, the most famous people of the spiritual treasure temple were the first 2 generations of sect masters, Lord Qingyun, Ling Qingzi and his junior, Lord Purple's son, Su Fenghua. Lord Purple's son did not have a Taoist name because his master did not have time to give him one. He only used his secular name. A sect with 2 Dao masters and 2 martial immortals. After entering the Daoist world, the spiritual treasure temple only relied on these 2 people to rise again. At the peak of their glory, these 2 people were not inferior to the top sections. They were very famous. Although the spiritual treasure temple could not produce a martial immortal in every generation due to the number of people, it did not hurt their reputation. Moreover, Lu Sanjin had heard that during the great ancient calamity, the master of these 2 people was also an expert who had the qualifications to step into the martial immortal realm. Unfortunately, he did not make it to the Daoist and died. That person must be the Reverend Crimson Afterglow that Chu Xiu mentioned. This Reverend Crimson Afterglow only existed in legends. Apart from people mentioning it at the beginning, Lu Sanjin could guarantee that after 10,000 years, there were not many Daoist martial artists who had heard of this name. Only the disciples of big sects like the Imperial Sky Pavilion would know of him. Lu Sanjin looked at Chu Xiu suspiciously. This suspicious guy said it as if it was the truth. Could it be that he was really the descendant of the ancient venerables? At this moment, Yinlingzi became excited after listening to Chu Xiu. Brother Chu's ancestral master even knows this. He must be someone who is very close to the ancestral master of the spiritual treasure temple. If master and the others know that there is an old friend in the spiritual treasure temple, they will be very happy. Lu Sanjin looked at Yinlingzi and said, "What he said, is it true?" Yinlingzi nodded and said, "Of course, it is true." Back then, the 2 ancestral masters, Qingyun and Xiang, said that the reason they could come to the Daoist world in exchange for a chance of survival was because ancestral master Crimson Afterglow and the other ancestral masters exchanged their lives. Therefore, there will always be their memorial tablets in the spiritual treasure temple. The disciples of the temple will never forget them. Moreover, ancestral master Xiang has the habit of keeping a diary. I have read many of his diary memories before the great ancient calamity. The character and preferences of those ancestral masters are exactly the same as what Brother Chu said. These things may not even be known by the disciples of the spiritual treasure temple. Since Brother Chu is able to explain it in such detail, it seems that the ancestral master of the spiritual treasure temple must have a very close relationship with the spiritual treasure temple. Chu Xiu nodded and said, "It can be said that it is very close." The ancestral master of the spiritual treasure temple is a Taoist, Buddhist, and demon cultivator. In the past, ancestral master Crimson Afterglow did not have any sectarian bias and taught the ancestral master of the spiritual treasure temple many things. This kindness, my faction will never forget. Seeing that Yin Lingzi and Chu Xiu were chatting happily, Lu Sanjin started to feel awkward. Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi seemed to be talking about the same things. He would suspect Chu Xiu, but he would not suspect Yin Lingzi. Therefore, this seemingly suspicious guy turned out to be the real ancestral master. Lu Sanjin rubbed his hands and said, "I did not expect Brother Chu to be the descendant of Gu Zun. Please forgive me for my ignorance, I almost misunderstood Brother Chu." Although he was embarrassed, he was still thick-skinned. Although he was not afraid of Chu Xiu, it was not a good thing to offend a descendant of Gu Zun for no reason. Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Do I look like a swindler with my suspicious appearance?" Lu Sanjin laughed and said, "You can't blame me for this." It was Jiangzong who said it so mysteriously. "Brother Chu, don't worry, I will teach that old man a lesson later." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. This guy really did not take Jiangzong, who was in the heaven and earth mystic opening state seriously. Moreover, Chu Xiu could feel that when Lu Sanjin said this, it was not because he was the eastern region wayfarer of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, but because he had the qualifications to look down on Jiangzong. Lu Sanjin waved his hand in a very friendly manner and said, "Since Brother Yin Lingzi is here today, I will treat the two of you to a meal as an apology." Lu Sanjin's attitude was very humble, and Chu Xiu could not refuse. This person had a temperament that seemed to be able to get familiar with anyone very quickly. Moreover, Chu Xiu also wanted to find an opportunity to ask Lu Sanjin about Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago. According to the Wind Smell Pavilion's records, Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji had caused such a big commotion 500 years ago, and the Imperial Sky Pavilion and other large sects in the eastern region knew about it. Moreover, it was the Imperial Sky Pavilion who had personally ordered the Dilua mountain range to be sealed off. Others might not know about it, but the Imperial Sky Pavilion definitely knew about it. Chapter 1103. Lu Sanjin was very friendly, which was actually an advantage, but Chu Xiu also found a shortcoming of him, which was stinginess. He said that he would treat Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi to a meal. Originally, Chu Xiu thought that he would definitely take them to the largest restaurant in Anzhou Prefecture for a meal. But in the end, he took Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi to a small restaurant in the nameless town to eat hot pot chicken, and also freeloaded a pot of wine from the owner. Seeing Chu Xiu's slightly strange look, Lu Sanjin smiled and said, "Brother Chu, I am not neglecting you. Don't think that this restaurant is inconspicuous, but the hot pot chicken here is quite famous. Every time I come to Fonglin Prefecture for inspection, Jiangzong invites me to eat delicacies, but I am too lazy to go. Every time, I specially come here to eat hot pot chicken. Brother Chu, try it, the taste is definitely not bad." Chu Xiu picked up a piece with his chopsticks, and the taste was indeed very good. He did not know whether it was because of the good feng shui of the Daoist region, or because of the excellent skills of the restaurant. The chicken was incomparably delicious. At this time, Yin Lingzi had already begun to eat. Yin Lingzi was also very handsome, and his Taoist robe matched his temperament, which naturally gave him a feeling of being free and unfettered. But at this time, when he was eating, he wolfed down the food, as if someone was fighting with him, which greatly affected his image. Although it was not the first time that Lu Sanjin met Yin Lingzi, it was the first time that he invited Yin Lingzi to a meal. Seeing him like this, Lu Sanjin could not help but feel a little puzzled. "Brother Yin Lingzi, why does the Lingbao Temple force you to abstain from eating?" Yin Lingzi smiled embarrassedly and said, "I've let the two of you see something embarrassing. Although the Spirit Treasure Temple doesn't require you to abstain from eating, Uncle Master Lin's cooking is very delicious. However, he only cooks one good dish per meal, and the rest is just half-hearted. According to him, every time he cooks, only the first dish is the most diligent, and when he cooks the second dish, he can no longer achieve perfection. 9 points or 1 point is the same, anyway, it is all to fill the stomach, so it is fine as long as it is edible. That's why every time we eat, we'll start fighting for the good dish. It's already become a habit. Chu Xiu rubbed his chin. The kitchen of the Lingbao Temple was a place that produced talented people. Even the chef in charge of the kitchen was not simple. Everyone ate and chatted at the same time. Of course, most of the time, it was Lu Sanjin who was talking. Yin Lingzi would occasionally interrupt, and Chu Xiu was listening. Chu Xiu had more or less learned about the Daoist from the books and records of the major powers in Fenglin Commandery. However, the more profound matters were obviously not things that the sects in Fenglin County could know. Learning this information from a disciple of a large sect like Lu Sanjin was more valuable than information from other sections. Halfway through the meal, Lu Sanjin suddenly sighed and said, "The Daoist have not been at peace for the past few hundred years. Things were happening everywhere in the north, south, east, and west regions. I only found out about the situation in other places after I returned to the Imperial Sky Pavilion some time ago. In the southern region, the blissful demon palace has started to stir up trouble again. Those madmen study all kinds of strange things every day. Sooner or later, they'll cause trouble. It's said that a madman appeared in the northern region. When the Tao Master of the Three Pristines was preaching, he publicly refuted the Tao Master's philosophy. It's said that he caused quite a stir. In the western region, the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple and the Sanskrit sect are locked in a fierce battle. They're all bald, so why bother to make things difficult for bald donkeys?" Listening to Lu Sanjin's words, Chu Xiu thought to himself that the Daoist and the mortal world were not much different. It seemed peaceful, but in fact, there were turbulent undercurrents. In that case, only the eastern region is the most peaceful. Lu Sanjin sneered and said, "On the contrary, the eastern region is the most chaotic. A few hundred years ago, the Cold River City rose and became a top sect. The eastern region isn't small, but it's only so big. The top forces are limited. Now that the Cold River City is suddenly involved, who knows how much killing and scheming is going on. Now that such a big thing has happened, it's not a big thing to look back at the other things in the eastern region." Speaking of this, Lu Sanjin suddenly asked Yin Lingzi, "By the way, brother Yin Lingzi, is there anything unusual in the blessed abode of your treasure temple recently?" Chu Xiu gently knocked on the table. He knew what the blessed abode was, which was also a common knowledge of the Daoist people. The so-called blessed abode was, in fact, the same as the mortal world and the 6 illusory realms in the mortal world. It was a subsidiary space of the Daoist people. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth there was even denser than that of the outside world. There were also some strange phenomena formed by heaven and earth, which had the power to seize the fortune of heaven and earth. All the top Daoist sects had their own blessed abode, and some even had more than one. It was said that when the Cold River City rose in the past, the blessed abode in the eastern region had been divided. But Meng Xinghe, with the secret method of his Xinghe loose cultivator, forcibly created a blessed abode, which shocked the Daoist people. Yin Lingzi shook his head and said, "No, everything is normal." Lu Sanjin sighed and said, "I heard that one of High Heaven sect's blessed abode, the Jade Mirror, has shown signs of Yuan Qi spreading, so High Heaven's sect has sealed off the Jade Mirror and no disciples are allowed to enter it. The elders of my Royal Heaven Pavilion are worried that the great ancient calamity will repeat itself in the Daoist world." Chu Xiu asked, "What does the leakage of Yuan Qi from the blessed abode have to do with the great ancient calamity?" There were countless speculations about the great ancient calamity in the mortal world, but in the Daoist world, the other small sects only recorded some common knowledge of the Daoist people. There were also descriptions of the great ancient calamity, but they were vague and unclear. Lu Sanjin was surprised and said, "Didn't your master tell you about these things? Since you are a descendant of the ancient venerables, you should know about these things." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I do know, but because of the enmity between my master and the sect, he is extremely strict with me. My cultivation is practically like a maniac, so how would I have the time to look at these messy things? My accent sounds a little strange because all these years, besides cultivating, I haven't even had the opportunity to speak." Lingzi looked at Chu Xiu sympathetically and said, then Brother Chu is really pitiful. Lu Sanjin also nodded in agreement, it is indeed pitiful. Unable to eat, unable to drink, unable to touch women, having to face an old man every day. Brother Chu, don't you feel depressed? Jiangzong said you are ruthless, is it because you are? Chu Xiu coughed and said, let's talk about the great ancient calamity. Lu Sanjin forcefully changed the topic and said, actually, there's nothing much to say. In any case, according to the records of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, humans have a lifespan, and nothing in this world is eternal. Naturally, it's the same for this world. The great ancient calamity is the end of the lifespans of the world, so all kinds of natural disasters and even man-made disasters occur. The Three Pure Palaces explanation is very interesting. According to him, the world will not die, but will change its appearance after a reincarnation. However, people like us are like parasites, living in this world. We are already familiar with this world, so naturally, we can't bear to change our environment. Therefore, this calamity is not a calamity of the world, but a calamity of the human race. Fortunately, before the great ancient calamity arrived, there were already some signs and strange phenomena. Among them, the leakage of the vitality from the various grotto heavens and blessed lands is one of them. This has not happened in the Daoist Ocean for the past 10,000 years, but in the past few hundred years, there have been signs of it. Lingzi said, actually, this is considered a normal phenomenon. The space in the grotto heavens and blessed lands is unstable, and it is easy for fluctuations to occur. When outsiders enter to cultivate or set up formations, it is easy for the grotto heavens and blessed lands to be damaged. Lu Sanjin drank the last mouthful of wine and said, I hope so. However, there are always pessimistic people who are worried that the great ancient calamity will come again. But it doesn't matter whether it comes or not, I have no hope of meeting it in this lifetime. After I die, I don't care about the great ancient calamity. After eating, Chu Xiu asked Lu Sanjin tentatively, Brother Lu, since you are the Eastern region wayfarer, you must know a lot about the Eastern region. You should know from Jiangzong that it is not convenient for my bloodline to reveal our name. If we don't find the enemy of my ancestral master and defeat his successor, my bloodline will not have the face to reveal our name. So, do you know that 500 years ago, there was an expert in devil arts in the Eastern region called Dugu Weiwei? Lu Sanjin curled his lips and said, in my opinion, you primeval venerable successors are so pretentious. Didn't you lose once? Why are you so serious? It's not like everyone has never lost in their lives. Although he said that, Lu Sanjin still thought about it carefully for a moment. He shook his head and said, I don't remember. More importantly, it's been too long. 500 years is enough for several generations to reproduce. If you ask me about the current situation, it's more like it. However, I don't know. Someone should know. Our Imperial Sky Pavilion's previous pavilion master was a martial immortal realm expert. 500 years ago, he belonged to that generation. Although I dare not say he was in the Imperial Sky Pavilion's upper echelon, his status was not low either. If there really was such a person, he should know. At this point, Lu Sanjin's eyes suddenly turned and he said, Brother Chu, why don't we make a deal? If you want information about this person, I can introduce you to our Imperial Sky Pavilion's previous pavilion master. Ever since he handed over the position of Imperial Sky Pavilion's previous pavilion master 100 years ago, he no longer cares about the Daoist Ocean's affairs. It's not easy for others to meet him. Chu Xiu knocked on the table and asked, what's the deal? Lu Sanjin grinned and said, it's very simple. Soon, our Imperial Sky Pavilion will have a martial arts exchange with High Heaven Sect. Both sides will send some disciples to participate. I want to invite Brother Chu to join the martial arts exchange as my Imperial Sky Pavilion's honored guest. With Brother Chu's strength, it's too unfair for you to be an honored guest of that Nine Phoenix Sword Sect. What kind of trash is that Nine Phoenix Sword Sect? Even if Brother Chu can compare to Meng Xinghe, can his Nine Phoenix Sword Sect compare to Cold River City? Not everyone is like Yi Weikong. Chapter 1104. Lu Sanjin's sudden invitation surprised Chu Xiu a little. Although the two sides were not enemies before, their relationship should not have been this good, right? As such, Chu Xiu asked curiously, since it's a martial arts practice between the two sects, why don't you participate, Brother Lu? The position of Eastern Territory Traveler can be said to be the successor to the Pavilion Master. I can't think of anyone in the entire Imperial Sky Pavilion who is more suitable to participate in this martial arts practice than Brother Lu. Lu Sanjin said awkwardly, I would like to participate, but in this year's martial arts practice between the two sects, I am forbidden from participating. High Heaven Sect and my Imperial Sky Pavilion are both great sects in the Eastern Territory, so this martial arts practice has been held more than once or twice. However, during the last martial arts practice, there was a guy from High Heaven Sect who had a foul mouth, so I couldn't hold back and directly crippled his cultivation, so I was banned from participating in the next martial arts practice. If I were to brag about myself, without me in this martial arts practice, High Heaven Sect would definitely lose, so the Pavilion Master has long since asked me to find a way. He even said that I have many friends and could pull one of them over as an honored guest to participate in this martial arts practice. At this point, Lu Sanjin smiled bitterly and said, I do have many friends, but none of us are idiots. Although this is just an ordinary martial arts practice, it is a matter of face for both High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion. If someone represents Imperial Sky Pavilion and defeats High Heaven Sect, it will definitely affect the relationship between their sects. For example, fellow Daoist Ling Zi is here now, but I didn't invite him for this reason. I can't let fellow Daoist Ling Zi's Spirit Treasure Temple form a grudge with High Heaven Sect over such a trivial matter. But Brother Chu is different, you are Gu Zun's successor, so you don't have to worry about High Heaven Sect targeting you. Moreover, High Heaven Sect won't run to the Mountain Forest to find trouble with your ancestral founder over such a trivial matter. Brother Chu, if you agree, not only can I introduce you to my Imperial Sky Pavilion's old ancestor, I can also treat you like a top-honored guest of my Imperial Sky Pavilion. Ever since Meng Xinghe, the practice of Daoist recruiting guest elders had become prevalent. However, a sect like the Nine Phoenix Sword sect wouldn't be able to keep a powerful guest elder even if they found one. However, for a top sect like the Imperial Sky Pavilion, their guest retainers of various abilities were divided into various ranks. The highest level of guest elders were reserved for experts in the profound understanding realm. As for martial immortals, experts of that level would not be willing to become a guest elder for others. Lu Sanjin said that he would give Chu Xiu the highest level of treatment, which was almost to treat Chu Xiu as a mysterious opening realm expert. Chu Xiu's lips curled into a smile, deal. There was no benefit in keeping a low profile. After figuring out the general situation of the Daoist people, Chu Xiu's high-profile actions had borne fruit, just like now. No one doubted Chu Xiu's true identity since he was invited by the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a guest elder. Lu Sanjin was overjoyed and said, since that's the case, we'll set off after settling some matters. By the way, Brother Lingzi, you've been traveling around the Daoist. You should be interested in the martial arts exhibition between the two sects, right? Why don't we go together? Lingzi also smiled warmly and said, sure. After finalizing the matter, Lu Sanjin was swift and decisive. He first brought Chu Xiu to the eastern region. Chu Xiu was still the Nine Phoenix Sword sect's guest elder, so he had to inform the Nine Phoenix Sword sect first. Although it was fine not to inform them, the Imperial Sky Pavilion was very particular. They could be overbearing, but they could not be unreasonable. Therefore, Lu Sanjin called Lin Yazi to the in-province prefecture. Meanwhile, in the in-province prefectural governor's mansion, Jianghu looked at Chu Xiu and Lu Sanjin with a dumbfounded expression. Previously, he had been doubting Chu Xiu's abilities. In the blink of an eye, Chu Xiu had become the Emperor Sky Pavilion's guest elder. Since Lu Sanjin had confirmed that Chu Xiu was Gu Zun's successor, his identity must be correct. Lu Sanjin's status in the Imperial Sky Pavilion was almost equivalent to that of a crown prince in the lower realm. Even a feudal lord like Jianghu had to give him face and treat him politely. Although not every eastern region wayfarer would eventually become the Imperial Sky Pavilion's pavilion master, at least more than half of them did. This probability was very shocking. At this moment, Jianghu was secretly thankful that he was used to being cautious. Otherwise, he would not care about anything and offend Chu Xiu thoroughly. That would be troublesome. Jianghu laughed heartily and said, "Back then, I said that Chu was extraordinarily talented and looked like Gu Zun's successor. There's no doubt about it. Now, it seems that I was right." Lu Sanjin pursed his lips. That was not what Jianghu had said previously. He had described Chu Xiu as very suspicious. After some small talk, Lin Yazi brought Lin Fengwu to the prefectural governor's mansion. On the way there, Lin Yazi was nervous. He did not know if Chu Xiu's attitude had angered the prefectural governor and he had come to cause trouble for them. After all, Jianghu had rarely sent a sect's leader directly to the prefectural governor's mansion. When they arrived, Jianghu said, "Sect leader Lin, Chu has now joined the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a guest elder. I'm here to inform you." In Jianghu's opinion, there was nothing much to say to a sect like the Nine Phoenix Sword sect. Not to mention that Chu Xiu had joined the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a guest elder. Even if they wanted the Nine Phoenix Sword sect's core cultivation method, they would have to obediently hand it over. However, as the Eastern Region advisor, Lu Sanjin did not want to have a bad reputation. That was why he was a little unreasonable. Lin Yazi was shocked when he heard this. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he said helplessly, "I know. I wish young Master Chu a bright future." Previously, Lin Yazi had been fantasizing that the Nine Phoenix Sword sect could one day become the next Cold River city. Now that he had finally woken up from his dream, he could not help but worry. What would happen to the Nine Phoenix Sword sect now that Chu Xiu had left? One had to know that the people Chu Xiu had killed and the things he had done would eventually be blamed on the Nine Phoenix Sword sect. Chu Xiu coughed and said, "There's one more thing I'd like to trouble you with, prefectural governor. No matter what, the Nine Phoenix Sword sect was the first sect I joined. Now that I'm leaving, there's still a trace of kinship left. Therefore, I'd like to trouble you to look after the Nine Phoenix Sword sect after I leave." Speaking of which, Chu Xiu had really messed with the Nine Phoenix Sword sect this time. Chu Xiu did not expect that he would encounter Lu Sanjin and become a guest elder of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Therefore, his previous plan was to support the Nine Phoenix Sword sect to the extent that it could dominate Fonglin County. That was why he had offended people without any restraint. On account of the kinship, Chu Xiu did not mind helping the Nine Phoenix Sword sect. After all, it was just a matter of saying the word. To Jianghu, it was just a matter of saying the word. He waved his hand and said, "No problem. The Nine Phoenix Sword sect will be fine in Fonglin County." Now that Chu Xiu had become a guest elder of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, he was one of them. Moreover, Lu Sanjin had personally recruited him into the Imperial Sky Pavilion, so he must be on good terms with Lu Sanjin. Naturally, Jianghu would not reject such a simple request. When Lin Yazi and Lin Fengwu walked out of the prefectural governor's manor, Lin Yazi could not help but say when he saw Lin Fengwu's dazed expression, "Girl, don't tell me you have some improper thoughts about that young Master Chu? I'd advise you to get over it. We're from two different worlds. Although I named you Fengwu, you're not a true phoenix. He's a true dragon." I've been thinking too much. I really thought I was Yi Weikong from Cold River City. Lin Fengwu had been strong-willed since a young age, and her strength was not inferior to that of a man. Therefore, it was not strange that she would fall for a powerful young expert like Chu Xiu. However, Lin Yazi had finally gotten over it. He and Chu Xiu were indeed from two different worlds. He was only the sect leader of a small sect, while Chu Xiu was the successor of Gu Zun. Over the years, there had been many successors of Gu Zun as guest elders, but only Cold River City had risen to prominence. Lin Fengwu forced a smile and said, "Father, you must be joking. I'm just feeling pity for the Nine Phoenix Sword sect." Actually, Lin Yazi was right. She did have some thoughts about Chu Xiu. She was a competitive person, but those so-called young talents in Fonglin County could not even compare to her. What right did they have to catch her eye? Therefore, when Chu Xiu, who was so powerful that Lin Fengwu had to look up to, appeared, she immediately attracted her attention. However, when she saw that Chu Xiu's current status was on par with the prefectural governor, she knew that she and Senior Chu were indeed from two different worlds. At the prefectural governor's manor, Jianghu had given face and agreed to Chu Xiu's request. Hence, Chu Xiu could not be too careless. He thought about it and said, "What prefectural governor wants to do now is to be transferred back to the Imperial Sky Pavilion's headquarters." Jianghu glanced at Lu Sanjin and nodded. "That's right. Although some people like to be a local tyrant, I'm still obsessed with martial arts." Everyone in the Imperial Sky Pavilion knew what he was thinking about, so he did not need to hide it from Lu Sanjin. Chu Xiu said, "I can give you an idea, prefectural governor. You can plunder, obtain more resources from Fanglin County and increase your merit." "Oh? What idea?" Jianghu did not think much of it. He had been the prefectural governor for more than 10 years. Did he need a young martial artist like Chu Xiu to teach him anything? Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "Prefectural governor, it's a good idea to earn benefits by maintaining the balance in Fanglin County. However, it's too slow. There will only be pressure when there's competition. Why don't we change the method? Prefectural governor, you can announce that you're going into seclusion but secretly provoke the martial arts world in Fanglin County to kill each other. However, when someone's clan is annihilated, you can ask for the benefits. It can't be more, but it can't be less either. 50% is just right. This way, the ambitious forces will see the benefits. Even if it's just 50% of the resources, they'll still be willing to fight for it. The forces without ambition will start accumulating their strength passively in order to protect themselves. The entire Fanglin County is like a pool of stagnant water. How boring is that? Prefectural governor, you'll gain more benefits if you move. The only drawback of this method is that it will quickly create a powerful force. It all depends on whether prefectural governor can suppress them." Chapter 1105. After listening to Chu Xiu's suggestion, Jianghu and Lu Sanjin broke out in a cold sweat. Chu Xiu's move was indeed ruthless. However, at the same time, he was shrewd enough to get himself out of it. Jianghu only benefited from the fact that he did not make a move. Therefore, they could not blame Jianghu and the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Unless all the forces in Fanglin County had no desires and did not fight for it. Unfortunately, fighting and killing were the nature of martial artists, and greed was human nature. Jianghu could imagine that if he followed Chu Xiu's plan, Fanglin County would turn into a pot of porridge in a short period of time. Of course, he would be the one eating the porridge. As for the shortcomings mentioned by Chu Xiu, he did not care at all. No matter how big a sect was, could it be bigger than the Imperial Sky Pavilion? Jianghu subconsciously glanced at Lu Sanjin. Lu Sanjin chuckled and said, "I won't care about these things as long as you don't cause trouble and ruin the reputation of the Imperial Sky Pavilion." Jianghu bowed to Chu Xiu and said with a solemn expression, "Thank you, Chu, for your suggestion." It was a simple matter for him to help Chu Xiu look after the 9 Phoenix Sword sect. However, Chu Xiu's idea was to help him accumulate merits faster and return to the Imperial Sky Pavilion's headquarters. After Chu Xiu and the others left, Jianghu felt that something was amiss. Wasn't Chu Xiu the successor of Guzun? He was obsessed with the martial Dao. Why would he have so many schemes? It was even more than Jianghu, who had been the prefectural governor for more than a decade. However, Jianghu did not think too much about it. Strength and scheming were never proportional. He had seen many people who were strong but simple-minded. They were brainless and rash, and they only knew how to use their fists. Maybe Chu Xiu was born to be scheming. As the successor of Guzun, he should not only be talented, but also not be bad in other aspects. Take Meng Xinghe for example. He was not only powerful, but also had good connections. He helped Cold River City come up with many ideas and pushed it into the ranks of the top sects in the world. The place where Royal Sky Pavilion and High Heaven Sect would hold the martial show was in High Heaven City, where High Heaven Sect was located. The martial arts demonstration between the two sides was actually more like a dispute over grievances. Since the beginning of the ancient Great Tribulation, the two sects had actually been at odds with each other. In addition, High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion were very similar in terms of martial Dao and martial Dao, so the two sides had not been pleasing to the eye for a long time. Before the ancient Great Tribulation, the two sides had fought several times. However, after coming to the celestial absolute heaven, they knew that they were already considered lucky survivors. Every cultivator was extremely precious and should not be wasted in meaningless fights. Therefore, when the people of the two sects clashed again, the high-level officials of the two sects set a rule that no life-and-death fights were allowed. Every 5 years, there would be a martial arts demonstration, only competition, no life-and-death battles. Either side could put up a bet or various conditions. 10,000 years later, although the Daoist sects had developed to this scale and were not afraid of a life-and-death battle, it did not matter to Imperial Sky Pavilion and High Heaven Sect. Although the two sects had conflicts, they also found the benefits of using this method to resolve conflicts. Of course, the premise was that High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion could maintain their strength at an equal level. Otherwise, if one side was too weak, they could not blame others for being destroyed. High Heaven City, Eastern Territory. When Lu Sanjin brought Chu Xiu to High Heaven City, Chu Xiu finally realized how big the entire Eastern Territory was. Previously, he had only wandered around Fenglin County, and in his opinion, although the scope of Fenglin County was much larger than that of the lower world, it was not too exaggerated. But after crossing several regions of the Eastern Territory with Lu Sanjin, Chu Xiu discovered that the area of Fenglin County was actually quite small among the several counties under the jurisdiction of Imperial Sky Pavilion. Although Imperial Sky Pavilion's sphere of influence was not comparable to that of Eastern Qi in the lower world, it was comparable to that of Northern Yen. High Heaven City, where High Heaven Sect was located, did not belong to any county but was instead a giant city. The city walls were thousands of meters high, and looking up from below, one could not see the edge of the city. Moreover, all the city walls were built with a kind of bluestone with a white jade luster, giving off a solemn and dignified feeling. Lu Sanjin saw the slightly shocked look on Chu Xiu's face, but he just curled his lips and said, "High Heaven Sect just likes to show off their face, it's not very useful." Although he said so, Lu Sanjin was still a little jealous, because High Heaven Sect's ostentation was indeed much larger than his Imperial Sky Pavilion's. The people of Imperial Sky Pavilion were relatively straightforward, and when they first came to the Daoist continent, they did not think too much about it and rebuilt the sect according to the scale of the lower world, unlike High Heaven Sect, which had specially gathered all kinds of strange materials from the Daoist continent to build a magnificent sect. Entering High Heaven City, Chu Xiu suddenly felt an extremely rich world yuan qi wash over him. The world yuan qi in the Daoist continent was already very rich, but the world yuan qi in High Heaven City was even more amazing. The entire High Heaven City was covered in spirit arrays, and with the support of these spirit arrays, the original world yuan qi of the outside world was condensed, making the entire High Heaven City look like a paradise. Since High Heaven City was where High Heaven Sect was located, most of the people here were naturally cultivators from High Heaven Sect. These cultivators from High Heaven Sect were all dressed in white robes and had confident and proud expressions on their faces, giving off the aura of a great sect. However, this was not what Chu Xiu was focused on. He found that these Daoist sects always seemed to like to dress the same way. When he first came here, the people from the small sects he met thought he was a mysterious heavenly realm cultivator. Obviously, mysterious heavenly realm cultivators liked to wear black robes while High Heaven sects preferred to wear white. At this time, when the two sects were conducting a martial arts exhibition, some of the Eastern Territory's big sects and some famous people would also come to watch, so it was easy to distinguish who was a disciple of High Heaven Sect and who was an outsider. Lu Sanjin said, "Brother Chu, Brother Yinlingzi, the people from my Imperial Sky Pavilion should have already arrived, and the martial arts exhibition will begin in a few days. During this time, we will go to my Imperial Sky Pavilion station to rest for a while." Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi both nodded and followed Lu Sanjin's arrangements. The location of the martial arts exhibition between the two sects changed every time. Last time it was Imperial Sky Pavilion, and this time it was High Heaven Sect Station. Although the conflict between the two sects was somewhat deep, it was still acceptable on the surface. At the very least, the station that High Heaven Sect arranged for Imperial Sky Pavilion was quite good. It was a special hall filled with cultivators belonging to Imperial Sky Pavilion. After the Imperial Sky Pavilion cultivators guarding the entrance saw Lu Sanjin, they immediately respectfully greeted him as Sir and welcomed him inside. Did Pavilion Master and the others not come this time? Lu Sanjin asked casually. One of the guards replied, Sir Pavilion Master has some matters to attend to and is unable to leave, so he asked Sir Zhong to bring some people here. Hearing this name, Lu Sanjin's expression changed slightly. Yin Lingzi only cared about the surrounding scenery and did not pay attention to it. Chu Xiu noticed the anomaly and asked, What's wrong? Lu Sanjin snorted lightly and said, It's nothing, I just found someone I don't like. Zhong Qiushui is the vice pavilion master of our Imperial Heaven Pavilion. However, he's a little stubborn and overbearing. If he says anything unpleasant later, I hope Brother Chu and Brother Yin Lingzi won't take it to heart. I'm the Eastern Region Wayfarer, so I'm not under his control. Hearing Lu Sanjin say this, Chu Xiu's face also showed a subtle look. With the experience Chu Xiu had accumulated in the lower realm, with just a few words, he had already understood what was going on in Imperial Sky Pavilion. It was nothing more than internal discord. There were many strange things going on within the sect. In any case, Chu Xiu had never seen many sects that could really work together. However, as soon as this idea came to his mind, Chu Xiu glanced at Yin Lingzi subconsciously. It seemed that the Spirit Treasure Temple had always been very united, and there had never been any internal strife. However, after thinking about it carefully, the number of people in the Spirit Treasure Temple had never exceeded 3 digits. If there was internal strife with such a small number of people, it would really be impossible. Regarding Zhong Qiushui, in fact, even if Lu Sanjin did not introduce him, Chu Xiu also knew about him. He had obtained the various records of the Wind Scent Pavilion, and there was a lot of information about the Imperial Sky Pavilion. In fact, the Imperial Sky Pavilion had never had the position of Vice Pavilion Master. The Pavilion Master was the Pavilion Master. There was no need for a chief or a deputy. The style of doing things that carried enormous weight was more suitable for the Imperial Sky Pavilion. However, among the experts of the previous generation of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, the current Pavilion Master, Heavenly King Li Wuxiang and the Vice Pavilion Master Earthly Venerable, Zhong Qiushui were known as the Imperial Sky Pavilion's 2 heroes. The two of them almost suppressed the cultivators of the same realm in the High Heaven Sect to the point that they could not raise their heads. In the end, during the selection of the Pavilion Master, the two of them were originally in the Heaven and Earth Mystic Realm. However, Li Wuxiang suddenly stepped into the martial immortal stage and became the Pavilion Master of the current generation of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. However, for some reason, the previous generation's old Pavilion Master did not arrange another position for Zhong Qiushui. Instead, he stood his ground and created a new position of Vice Pavilion Master for Zhong Qiushui. However, from then on, a piece of news came out of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. The two people who were originally close friends often had conflicts. In any case, they were not on good terms. Chu Xiu dared to guarantee that there was definitely something fishy going on. However, he was not very curious and could not be bothered to find out what was going on. While he was thinking, Lu Sanjin had already brought Chu Xiu and Zhong Qiushui into the depths of the main hall. More than 10 cultivators from the Imperial Sky Pavilion who came to participate in the martial arts exhibition were there. Among the cultivators present, apart from 2 or 3 who were older, the rest were young cultivators. Even the weakest was at the real pellet realm. Among these people, a middle-aged man in a bright yellow luxurious robe sat in the middle. The middle-aged man was tall and had a dignified appearance. Anyone who looked into his eyes would not be able to see his true gaze. If one tried to look, they would only see a glaring golden light. This person was the Vice Pavilion Master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, Earthly Venerable, Zhongqiushui. As soon as they met, Zhongqiushui said coldly, Lu Sanjin, didn't you receive the sex order? The martial arts exhibition between the two sects is such a big event. Why are you dilly-dallying and rushing for time? Chapter 1106. As the Eastern Region Advisor, Lu Sanjin's status in the Imperial Sky Pavilion was not low. Even though Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi were outsiders, they could sense the strange atmosphere between the two of them when Lu Sanjin used an interrogative tone. Chu Xiu was also secretly looking at Zhongqiushui. His impression of Zhongqiushui could only be described in one word, unfathomable. Although Zhongqiushui had not reached the martial immortal realm, he was still at the peak of the heaven and earth profound enlightenment realm. With Chu Xiu's current cultivation, he dared to fight ordinary heaven and earth profound enlightenment realm cultivators, but when facing Zhongqiushui, he still could not figure out his opponent's strength. In the lower realm, Chu Xiu had only felt this kind of feeling from one person, and that was Yi Xiaonan, after refining the demon seed. This existence, who was once on par with the pavilion master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, was really not someone easy to deal with. At this time, Lu Sanjin changed his usual frivolous appearance and said tit for tat, the martial arts exhibition hasn't started yet, so what's the hurry? The pavilion master told me that I can't participate in this martial arts exhibition, so he asked me to find a friend to take the lead. See, I went to find him now. Zhongqiushui glanced at Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi. In an instant, a huge pressure had already attacked them. Chu Xiu furrowed his brows slightly, and a faint demonic aura rose around him, isolating him from the pressure. Yin Lingzi, who was next to him, also bloomed with a seven-colored glow, isolating the pressure. Seeing this scene, Lu Sanjin stepped forward directly, stood in front of the two, and said coldly, Vice Pavilion Master, what do you mean by this? I found these people to help my Imperial Sky Pavilion, not to be wronged here. Zhongqiushui said lightly, what's the hurry? Can this senior still bully these junior cultivators? Since you want them to help my Imperial Sky Pavilion, I have to see if they have the qualifications and strength to do so. Where did these two youngsters come from? Although you have many friends, are you sure any of them are willing to form a grudge with High Heaven Sect just to help you? Lu Sanjin pointed at Yin Lingzi and said, this is Yin Lingzi from Lingbao Temple. Yin Lingzi smiled and nodded at Zhongqiushui. He was not angry at Zhongqiushui's probing just now. Zhongqiushui was surprised, Silver Spirit's son with natural Dao aura? Although Zhongqiushui was a martial artist of the older generation, he had also heard of Yin Lingzi's name. After all, Yin Lingzi was the only Daoist who had been personally accepted by the Dao Master as a disciple, or more accurately, as a successor to his legacy. Yet, the Dao Master had still rejected Yin Lingzi. Lu Sanjin coughed and said, but this time, Daoist brother Yin Lingzi is only here to watch the fight. If Daoist brother Yin Lingzi were to participate in this fight, it would cause High Heaven Sect to hold a grudge against Spirit Treasure Temple. Brother Chu Xiu is the one fighting on my behalf. He's Gu Zun's successor. His status and strength are enough to represent the Imperial Heaven Pavilion in the battle. I've already made him our Imperial Heaven Pavilion's guest elder. Gu Zun's successor. Zhongqiushui glanced at Chu Xiu suspiciously. He did not expect that Lu Sanjin would even be able to hook up with the Gu Zun's successor. May I ask which Gu Zun's successor is he? Chu Xiu did not reply, so Lu Sanjin said, Brother Chu, it's a little difficult to reveal the identity of your lineage, as there's an enemy who once defeated the founder of his lineage. So, you must wait until Brother Chu defeats that successor and redeem yourself before you can reveal your name. Before Zhongqiushui could speak, a young cultivator from Imperial Heaven Pavilion sneered, what a joke. Lu Sanjin, do you believe such words? If he says he's the Gu Zun's successor, then he's the Gu Zun's successor. Any Tom, Dick, or Harry can say they're the Gu Zun's successor. Lu Sanjin said coldly, Huang Ju, it's not your turn to speak here. The martial ancestor of Brother Chu's branch has a strong background. He's familiar with the two Dao Masters of Spirit Treasure Temple, Qing Yun and Zi Yang, as well as Reverend Crimson Afterglow before the Great Ancient Calamity. Brother Lingzi can testify to this. Everyone present glanced at Lingzi. Since Lingzi stood there without saying anything, with Spirit Treasure Temple's endorsement, this Chu Xiu should be the real deal. At this moment, Chu Xiu said indifferently, Brother Lu, previously you invited me to join Imperial Heaven Pavilion as a foreign elder, but this is the first time I've heard of it. Is this the treatment a foreign elder receives? Putting aside the fact that I've been suspected, I've actually become a Tom, Dick, or Harry now. Lu Sanjin's expression changed as well. He did not want to offend Chu Xiu because of these matters. He was the one who found Chu Xiu. In the future, when Chu Xiu became the foreign elder of Imperial Heaven Pavilion, he would naturally stand on his side. Offending Chu Xiu was probably what Zhong Qiushui and the others wanted. However, at this moment, Zhong Qiushui waved her hand and said, Chu, you don't have to feel so aggrieved. Although a foreign elder is a foreign elder, the treatment our Imperial Heaven Pavilion gives to foreign elders isn't that bad. We've paid such a high price. What's the matter? Can't you just interrogate and test the foreign elder's character? Chu Xiu scoffed softly and said, Deputy Pavilion Master, I don't care about the conflicts and enmity between your Imperial Heaven Pavilion, and I can't be bothered. However, if someone tries to burn the fire on my head, don't blame me for being impolite. Who was the one who said I was a Tom, Dick, or Harry just now? Chu Xiu looked at Huang Ju. His aura was piercingly cold like a sharp blade as it sliced through the air, causing a crisp sound to be heard. At a time like this, it was not Chu Xiu's turn to keep a low profile. After all, his current identity was Gu Zun's successor. Everyone was a dragon and phoenix among men, and they were all extremely talented. It would be strange if someone like him could tolerate being called a Tom, Dick, or Harry. Moreover, when Chu Xiu was in the lower realm, he was already the leader of the Devil's sect. He was a prominent figure in the Devil Path who was seen as a great enemy by the Taoist sects and Buddhist sections. Even if Ramashutsi came, they would not dare to point at Chu Xiu and call him a Tom, Dick, or Harry. That would not only be an insult to Chu Xiu, but it would also be an insult to themselves. However, to Chu Xiu's surprise, a golden light flashed around Huang Ju and blocked Chu Xiu's aura. He stepped forward and sneered disdainfully, ignorance is not a crime. Is Gu Zun's successor really that petty? Very well, I would like to see for myself what kind of person the legendary successor of Gu Zun is capable of. As soon as Huang Ju's voice fell, blinding golden chi shone around him. He drew upon the power of heaven and earth and turned into golden runes that circled around him. This young man who seemed to be about the same age as Chu Xiu had a cultivation base at the peak of spiritual refinement state. Zhong Qiushui said faintly, That's great. Since you weren't here this time, I was going to let Huang Ju replace you. Now that you've found a helper, let's let Huang Ju test his skills. Cultivation base is not equivalent to combat strength. Gu Zun's successor is indeed talented, but there are many who have practiced martial arts for their entire lives and still do not know how to fight in the end. No matter what his identity is, since he has become the Imperial Heaven Pavilion's guest, he'll represent the Imperial Heaven Pavilion to fight. If he's too pathetic, it'll be the Imperial Heaven Pavilion's disgrace. Hearing Zhong Qiushui's words, Lu Sanjin hurriedly transmitted a message to Chu Xiu, saying quickly, Brother Chu, be careful. Don't be fooled by this Huang Ju's arrogant, egotistical, and idiotic appearance. This fellow is not easy to deal with. He fought his way up from the bottom of the Imperial Heaven Pavilion. Before he was 15, he followed a county governor to suppress the sex riots. In the end, he was valued by the vice pavilion master and kept by his side. His strength was forged from fighting with the sword and saber. Back then, he even fought with me for the position of the East Region Wayfarer, but I defeated him. However, all these years, he's been kept by the vice pavilion master's side to cultivate. Who knows if he has any trump cards? Before Lu Sanjin could finish speaking, Chu Xiu took a step forward and threw a punch. When the punch was thrown, the entire hall seemed to tremble. The gold-and-silver true fire of inner energy and the pitch-black flames of devastation swirled around Chu Xiu's fist wind like a tornado that tore the heavens and earth apart. The fist intent of the punch was extremely domineering, as if it was the only one in the entire world. The moment Chu Xiu's punch landed, everyone's expressions, including Zhong Qiushui's, changed. Perhaps Chen Qingdi was not the first to think of the cultivation method of tempering one's body with true fire, but Chen Qingdi was the first to succeed in using it. Even in ancient times, no one had tried such a crazy method, especially in the Daoist Empire, where the qi of heaven and earth was abundant. There were too many opportunities to advance, and very few people would even think of this seemingly crazy method of cultivation. Now, Chu Xiu's punch seemed to have unleashed the physical strength of the true fire to the extreme. The punch shattered the heavens and earth, and the powerful force caused Huang Ju's expression to change abruptly. Countless ways to block and dodge flashed through his mind in an instant, but there was only one result, and that was that he could not dodge or block it. Almost in the blink of an eye, the powerful force had already arrived in front of him. It was an extremely simple punch, without any changes, but it was more terrifying than those complicated martial arts techniques. Huang Ju shouted, and the runes that glowed with golden light around him condensed into a large seal in front of him, drawing the power of heaven and earth to meet Chu Xiu's punch. This was the Imperial Sky Pavilion's secret martial arts technique, the Imperial Sky Seal. The Imperial Sky Queen of Earth, controlling all things. However, all of this was useless in the face of absolute power. The punch landed, and the seal shattered. A powerful force suddenly exploded with the two of them as the center. Zhong Qiushui, who was standing at the side, waved his hand and set up a realm. When the force collided with the realm, there was a series of explosions. Chu Xiu's figure remained where he was, but Huang Ju had already been sent flying dozens of feet away by the punch. He resisted the urge to fall to the ground, but he had just taken a step when he spat out a mouthful of blood. The entire place fell silent at once. Lu Sanjin's mouth was agape, and he forcefully swallowed his last warning to Chu Xiu to be careful. Monster, he was definitely a monster. Although Huang Ju's status in the Imperial Sky Pavilion was not as high as his, the Eastern Region wayfarer, he was still a top-notch figure among the younger generation. However, Huang Ju could not even block a single punch from Chu Xiu. What kind of monster did he bring back? Chapter 1107. One could say that Chu Xiu's punch had stunned everyone present. Lu Sanjin was even glad that the Silver Spirit Child had appeared when he and Chu Xiu were fighting earlier, so the two of them did not really fight. Otherwise, he would not have been able to withstand the power of Chu Xiu's punch without using that thing. Moreover, Lu Sanjin was certain that Chu Xiu had not used his full strength yet. This was because he saw the broken scabbard hanging on Chu Xiu's waist. He did not understand why the descendants of Gu Zun, who mostly looked like ascetic cultivators, would carry a flashy scabbard inlaid with purple gold and jade. This might be Chu Xiu's personal preference. However, Lu Sanjin was certain that since Chu Xiu carried a saber with him, the saber hidden in the flashy scabbard was definitely not a decoration. A cultivator who used a saber was already so terrifying even before he drew his saber. One could only imagine how powerful he was. Although her own disciple had vomited blood from Chu Xiu's attack, Zhong Qiushui did not get angry, nor did she find trouble with Chu Xiu by bullying him. He was the deputy pavilion master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, so he was magnanimous. He merely took a good look at Chu Xiu and said calmly, "Very well. You'll represent the Imperial Sky Pavilion as the finale of the martial arts exhibition this time." As soon as he was done speaking, Zhong Qiushui waved his hand and got someone to take the injured Huang Ju away. After everyone else had left, Lu Sanjin came up to him and sighed. "I didn't expect Brother Chu's strength to be so terrifying. Fortunately, I didn't fight you back then. Otherwise, I don't know if my weak body would have been able to take it." Chu Xiu only smiled and said nothing. He would not take Lu Sanjin's words seriously. Ever since he had pushed the heaven sun gazing at air to its peak when he faced the head-piercing 7 arrows, his experienced spiritual senses had become extremely sensitive. He was certain that Lu Sanjin's ability was not as simple as he appeared to be. This Eastern region traveler from the Imperial Sky Pavilion must still have a trump card. "By the way, Brother Chu, I still have to tell you the rules of the martial arts competition. In fact, there are no rules, but you have to pay attention to one thing. This time, everyone is fighting to determine the winner and loser, not to fight to the death, so you can't be heavy-handed. Speaking up to this point, Lu Sanjin smiled bitterly and said, last time, because I used a heavy hand, I was scolded when I went back and was banned from participating in this martial arts exhibition. Lu Sanjin was really afraid that Chu Xiu would use a heavy hand in the martial arts practice. Although he hadn't known Chu Xiu for a long time, he could tell that Chu Xiu was a ruthless person. Back in Fonglin County, when he was a guest elder of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect, he was very decisive in killing people. He even came up with a vicious plan for Jianghu. Of course, it may have been a good idea for Jianghu, but to the entire Fonglin County, it was extremely vicious. This kind of way of doing things was enough to prove that Chu Xiu was not a kind person. A person's personality and martial path usually complemented each other. Based on Chu Xiu's personality, Lu Sanjin was sure that he would not go easy on him. Chu Xiu waved his hand casually and said, "Don't worry, I know the severity of the situation. I'm not the kind of person who likes to kill. Once I make a move, I will fight to the death." Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Lu Sanjin nodded and said, "All right, Brother Chu, go and rest with Brother Yinlingzi first. Tomorrow, I will bring you around High Firmament City. There's actually nothing much to see here, but since it's your first time here, you can look around casually." At this moment, on a 9-story building outside the Imperial Sky Pavilion's main hall, a young man dressed in a white brocade robe embroidered with golden dragon patterns looked in the direction of the Imperial Sky Pavilion's main hall. He raised his brows slightly and said, "There are people fighting at the Imperial Sky Pavilion? Go and find out what's going on." The man was handsome, but his brows were raised extremely high. The arrogance in his eyes seemed to be innate and would not disappear no matter how hard he tried. A moment later, a disciple returned and reported, "I've found out that the Imperial Sky Pavilion's Lu Sanjin will not be participating in the martial exhibition this time, so he found a good friend of his to be the Imperial Sky Pavilion's guest retainer to represent him in the martial exhibition. I also heard that this guest retainer is a prime sovereign successor." However, Lu Sanjin and Vice Pavilion Master Zhong Qiushui have always been on bad terms. It seems that Zhong Qiushui doubted that this person could represent the Imperial Sky Pavilion, so the two sides tested each other out. In the end, the prime sovereign successor won. Although the Imperial Sky Pavilion's main hall was filled with their own people, this was High Firmament City after all. It was very easy for them to find out what was going on here. The young man's lips curled into a faint smile and said, "What a pity that Lu Sanjin won't be able to participate. Junior brother Zhonglu, it seems that I won't be able to avenge you. It's a pity that I was in retreat during the last martial exhibition. Otherwise, the one who would have been crippled might have been Lu Sanjin." There was another young cultivator next to the young man, and his face darkened slightly when he heard this. He was the disciple whose cultivation was crippled by Lu Sanjin during the last martial exhibition because of his foul mouth. However, his master had a very high status in High Heaven sect, so he asked for a 9 revolutions divine pill to reconstruct his meridians. Although he managed to recover some of his cultivation, it was not even half of what it was before. The young man in front of him did not dare to provoke him when his cultivation was still at the same level, but now that he saw this young man expose his scars, he could only sullenly say, "It doesn't matter, my personal grudge is just a small matter. This time, I still need to rely on senior brother Xianyuan to defeat the Imperial Sky Pavilion and wipe away our previous shame." Senior brother Xianyuan nodded directly and said, "Yes, when I wasn't here last time, you bunch of wastes actually lost so miserably. How useless." Upon hearing this, many of the High Heaven sect disciples present almost suffered internal injuries. Although this senior brother Xianyuan was strong and what he said was indeed true, saying it in front of so many people, "Did you even consider our feelings?" However, they also knew this young man's character, and they were indeed not his opponents, so they could only silently accept the title of waste. The next day, Lu Sanjin called Chu Xiu and Yinlingzi early in the morning to go to the largest restaurant in High Heaven City, the 9-story tower, to eat. Everything in High Heaven City was run by High Heaven Sect, and this 9-story tower was the same. Although High Heaven Tower only had 9 floors, each floor was more than 10 meters high, and the interior was unusually gorgeous and majestic. The white jade-like floor could even be used as a mirror. Chu Xiu had always been puzzled by High Heaven Sect's aesthetic standards. They seemed to blindly pursue grandeur and magnificence. This place was a restaurant for eating, so why did it have to be so grand and solemn? It would affect one's appetite. The last 3 floors of High Heaven Tower were not open to the public, and only the real high-level members of High Heaven Sect could enter. So Lu Sanjin directly led the 2 to sit on the 6th floor. After ordering a lot of dishes, Lu Sanjin introduced, "These guys from High Heaven Sect are actually very boring, and their cooking is the same. Their dishes are very rough, and there is no technical content at all. The only thing that is more interesting is that all the ingredients used are exotic delicacies produced in the Di Luo mountain range, and if you are lucky, you can even eat the meat of high-rank vicious beasts." Saying this, Lu Sanjin also glanced around, winked, and whispered, "Now is the time for the martial arts competition between the 2 sects. If it was on a normal day, there would be foreign singers and dancers performing here. Although they are singers and dancers, in fact, when they meet young talents, it is also common for them to offer themselves to sleep with them. Brother Chu, Brother Yin Lingzi, you are absolutely qualified. Now there should be some singers and dancers who have not left. Do you need me to help you find a few?" Yin Lingzi smiled and shook his head. "This little Daoist does not approach women." Lu Sanjin was surprised. "When did your Dao sect start to pay attention to this kind of thing? Did you learn it from those bald donkeys in the West?" Yin Lingzi shook his head and said, "Second martial uncle said that women are tigers, you can't touch them, you can't touch them. Love is difficult to overcome, like subduing dragons and tigers. Without this kind of state of mind, don't enter the gate of love." Lu Sanjin touched his nose and said, "In fact, you can ignore love and only talk about money, a pure physical relationship is the best." Yin Lingzi continued to shake his head. "Second martial uncle also said that in the mortal world, it is easy to lose one's state of mind. Of the 2 words lust, love, comes first, lust comes second. Don't mix it up." Lu Sanjin was thoroughly impressed. This was obviously a very romantic matter, but he was actually discussing it with Yin Lingzi in a serious manner. "Your second martial uncle is a genius. I heard that Spirit Treasure Temple is good at producing geniuses. It really is a well-deserved reputation." Lu Sanjin turned his eyes to Chu Xiu. "Brother Chu, do you need one? Rest assured, I will definitely choose a good one for you. You have been cultivating hard in the mountains and forests for decades, and now that you have finally come out, why don't you let go of yourself?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I also abstain from lust." Lu Sanjin was stunned. Did these 2 like to learn from those bald donkeys in the West? Chu Xiu glanced at him and said, "Don't forget, the martial arts practice is in a few days. Is it appropriate to waste your energy on women at this time? Did you do the same when you participated in the martial arts practice last time?" Lu Sanjin coughed awkwardly. He did not dare to do this during the martial arts practice last time, because it was the pavilion master who personally came with people, and he was closely watched. However, it was also the pavilion master's fault that he was so heavy-handed. If it wasn't for the fact that he was so strict, causing him to be filled with anger, he would not have been so heavy-handed during the martial arts practice. Just as Lu Sanjin was about to say something, a voice suddenly sounded. "Anyway, the result is that you will lose. It doesn't matter what you do before the martial arts practice, there is no need to be so nervous." Chu Xiu frowned slightly. He did not see the face of the person who spoke, but the arrogance in the tone was already overwhelming. Moreover, this person's tone was not just brainlessly arrogant, but full of confidence. Chu Xiu did not like to deal with such people, because usually their brain circuit was not quite the same as that of ordinary people, and it was easy for them to be swayed by emotions. However, hearing this voice, Lu Sanjin's face suddenly darkened. Xianyuan Wushuang. Why did this guy come out of seclusion? He is really annoying. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. Xianyuan? This was the first time he had seen such a powerful surname. Chapter 1108. When Chu Xiu saw Xianyuan Wushuang, he could almost guess what kind of existence he was. He was so arrogant that he didn't take anyone seriously. However, Xianyuan Wushuang had the qualification and strength. Chu Xiu cultivated true fire body refining and true fire refining, so his strength was comparable to that of a profound enlightenment realm expert. But it was only comparable. Except for Ling Yunzi, who had just stepped into the profound enlightenment realm, most of the others were stronger than Chu Xiu in terms of strength. However, Chu Xiu had never seen anyone in the true fire spiritual cultivation state who could compete with him in terms of strength and foundation. Even Kang Dongming, the sword sage of the East Sea, was no match for him. But now Chu Xiu saw that Xianyuan Wushuang's strength was not inferior to Chu Xiu's. Lu Sanjin secretly transmitted his voice to Chu Xiu, "Brother Chu, be careful of this guy who looks like he has a mental problem, although in fact, he does have a mental problem." Chu Xiu asked, "His surname is Xianyuan? A descendant of the human emperor?" Anyway, Chu Xiu had never seen the surname Xianyuan in the mortal world. It only existed in the legends of primitive times. It was said that the ancestor of the human clan was surnamed Xianyuan. Lu Sanjin curled his lips and said, "A descendant of the human emperor? This surname is given by him, and even his name is given by him. According to him, he is the most unique existence in the world, unparalleled in the world. How can his surname be the same as others? How could a normal person do such a thing? Isn't this a mental problem?" But although this guy has a mental problem, he is a complete monster. It is said that he was born without meridians. He has no meridians all over his body, so he can't cultivate any true qi at all. When he was first brought back to High Heaven sect, the person in charge of recruiting disciples was scolded by his superiors for bringing back a piece of trash. However, High Heaven sect was quite generous and did not drive him away directly, instead planning to drive him out after he reached adulthood. Who would have thought that although this guy couldn't cultivate true qi in the beginning, he relied on an introductory cultivation technique to forcefully open up a new path, allowing the power to circulate in every part of his body. He didn't have meridians, but his flesh and bones were meridians, so his true qi accumulation and operation were amazing. Almost no one in that group of disciples could compare with him. At that time, Xianyuan Wushuang was less than 10 years old. Later, he was accepted as a direct descendant of High Heaven sect, and along the way, his cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds. Any martial arts ancient book that fell into his hands, he could learn it in an hour, achieve minor accomplishment in a day, and comprehend 90% of its essence in just 3 days. Although this guy had some mental problems, it had to be said that he was really a genius in martial arts. I didn't of him of Xianyuan Wushuang. I didn't expect that he would come out. After listening to Lu Sanjin's information, Chu Xiu was also a little surprised. When he was in the mortal world, he had seen many geniuses. For example, LV Fengxian, who had amazing luck, 7th young master Feng, who had a natural sword Dao, Zhang Qingzhen, who had condensed the golden core of thunder, and Zhong Xian, who had cultivated the bright king's seal to an unprecedented level. If these people were placed in the environment of Daoist heaven, they would definitely be first-class figures. But Xianyuan Wushuang, who could modify his cultivation method at the age of 10 and walk on his own martial Dao, was simply a monster. Xianyuan Wushuang glanced at Lu Sanjin and said faintly, "Lu Sanjin, I know you must be secretly sending a voice transmission to slander me, but it doesn't matter. The strong won't be angry because of the weak slander and clamor, because that's all you have left." Lu Sanjin was a thick-skinned person. He almost fell out with Chu Xiu before, but after knowing Chu Xiu's real identity, he changed his face in the blink of an eye. But now, facing Xianyuan Wushuang, Lu Sanjin was so angry that his hands were trembling. Xianyuan Wushuang was not mocking him, but stating a fact. He really thought so, which was why Lu Sanjin was so angry. When encountering such a lunatic, even if you scolded him, you would not be able to defeat him. Xianyuan Wushuang. The martial arts exhibition will start in a few days. What are you doing here? Could it be that you want to have a fight before the martial arts exhibition? Xianyuan Wushuang glanced at Lu Sanjin and said lightly, I'm not here for you. After saying that, he turned his eyes to Chu Xiu and said, Are you the successor of Ancient Venerable who agreed to join the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a foreign elder? Chu Xiu touched his nose and nodded. Chu Xiu might be able to guess the thoughts of others, but he really could not figure out Xianyuan Wushuang. Xianyuan Wushuang nodded and said, Unfortunately, you made a wrong choice. The former pavilion master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion was a great figure, but he was already old. Heavenly King Li Wuxiang was not bad, but the Imperial Sky Pavilion had an earthly master, Zhong Qiushui. The two of them were fighting, and there would be no peace. Looking at the younger generation, even a person like Lu Sanjin could become the East Domain Traveler, which showed that there was no one else in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. It was unwise for you to choose to join the Imperial Sky Pavilion at this time. But you are very lucky to have met me. Now, I'll give you a chance to join the High Heaven sect as a foreign elder. What the Imperial Sky Pavilion can give you, the High Heaven sect can also give you. What the Imperial Sky Pavilion can't give you, the High Heaven sect can still give you. Lu Sanjin did not expect that Xianyuan Wushuang would dare to expose the shortcomings of the Imperial Sky Pavilion in front of him. He shouted angrily, Xianyuan Wushuang, what do you mean? Are you slandering the Imperial Sky Pavilion, or are you afraid that you will lose badly in the martial arts exhibition field? Nonsense. Do you really think there is no one else in the Imperial Sky Pavilion? Xianyuan Wushuang still said in a very indifferent but extremely arrogant manner, the outcome has been decided. Why would I be afraid of losing? I just want to win a little more beautiful too. During the martial arts exhibition field, there will be 3 rounds of 3 battles. I want to win all 3. If the successor of the Ancient Venerable meets the other disciples of the High Heaven sect, those good-for-nothings won't be able to stop him. Chu Xiu was shocked at this time. It was the first time he had seen a weirdo like Xianyuan Wushuang, who even scolded his own people when he went crazy. After he said this, the faces of the warriors of the High Heaven sect behind Xianyuan Wushuang darkened, even darker than Lu Sanjin's. Now, Chu Xiu also believed in Xianyuan Wushuang's strength in the High Heaven sect. If Xianyuan Wushuang acted like this and spoke without scruples, he would have been beaten to death long ago if he was not strong enough. Moreover, he had to be very strong to the point where he could ignore all kinds of schemes and plots. Otherwise, he would be easily killed by others. Chu Xiu wiped his nose and said, I'm sorry, I have to keep my word. I, Chu Xiu, am a man of his word. Since I promised to join the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a foreign elder, I won't go back on my word. Xianyuan Wushuang shrugged and said, Very well, there will always be people who keep making wrong choices in this world and never look back on the wrong path. It's not wrong for you to join the Imperial Sky Pavilion, but you made a mistake in meeting me, your opponent, when you joined the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Of course, you may regard me as your opponent, but my opponent will only be in the future. After saying this, Xianyuan Wushuang turned around and left with his people. For him, it was not worth making trouble for Chu Xiu before the martial arts exhibition field began. Moreover, he had never used any conspiracies since he was a child. In the face of anything, he would use his own strength to overcome it. This was his code of conduct. After Xianyuan Wushuang left, Yinlingzi hesitated for a long time before saying, I've heard that the character of this genius of the High Heaven sect, Xianyuan Wushuang, is somewhat indescribable. Now it seems that it is true. Lu Sanjin sneered and said, Indescribable? He's a psychopath. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, There is a difference between a psychopath and a genius. As you said, this person is not easy to deal with. The fact that he was able to survive until now with the way he did things is the best proof. Lu Sanjin nodded gloomily. After the dishes were served, he asked Chu Xiu and Yinlingzi to eat. His good mood was now completely ruined by Xianyuan Wushuang. However, Lu Sanjin's impression of Chu Xiu had improved a lot. People like Lu Sanjin seemed to be familiar with everyone and seemed to be friends with everyone, but in reality, that was probably because he was good at socializing. But in fact, there were only a few people who he could really treat as friends. Lu Sanjin had treated Chu Xiu the same way before. As the Eastern Territory partner, it was normal for him to try to rope in a prime venerable successor in his territory. But this time, Chu Xiu refused the recruitment of the High Heaven sect, which made him feel grateful. Because Xianyuan Wushuang was right. The Emperor Sky Pavilion and the High Heaven sect had been fighting against each other for so many years, but the Emperor Sky Pavilion had always been at a disadvantage. And now, it happened to be the time when the Emperor Sky Pavilion was at a disadvantage. If the Emperor Sky Pavilion had the upper hand, Lu Sanjin would not have been reprimanded and banned from participating in the martial arts exhibition last time when he had crippled someone. The Emperor Sky Pavilion could have explained it by saying that weapons had no eyes and fists had no heart, and they might have even rewarded Lu Sanjin afterwards. However, he was not as strong as Xianyuan Wushuang and gave him a reason to cause trouble, so he could only keep a low profile for the time being. 3 days later, the martial arts exhibition between the High Heaven sect and the Emperor Sky Pavilion was held as scheduled. At the very center of High Heaven City was a huge terrace that was thousands of meters long and wide. Countless spirit arrays were set up on it, and statues stood at each of the 4 corners. It was said that these were statues of the 4 ancestral masters who had made the greatest contributions to the High Heaven sect. This was the place where the High Heaven sect held the martial arts exhibition, but at other times, it was also used by the High Heaven sect's masters to give lectures. In the past, the martial arts exhibition between the 2 sects was used to settle personal grievances, but later on, it had become a conventional rule. There were even many foreign cultivators who came to watch the ceremony. The people of the High Heaven sect and the Emperor Sky Pavilion were on the north and south sides, while the east and west sides were reserved for the spectators. Sitting among the Emperor Sky Pavilion's crowd, Chu Xiu looked around. At this time, Lu Sanjin came over and said, "Brother Chu, there will be a martial immortal master from the High Heaven sect coming to give a lecture. You probably haven't heard of him, so listen carefully. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated." Chu Xiu's eyes lit up when he heard this. Chapter 1109. Chu Xiu had various speculations and conjectures about the martial immortal realm. In the lower realm, Chu Xiu was certain that there should be 4 people who had reached the martial immortal realm: Dugu Weiwei, Ning Xuanji, Zhong Shenxiu, and Jun Wushan. Moreover, Chu Xiu even suspected that Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji were top existences even among martial immortals. However, Chu Xiu did not know whether the martial immortal realm was divided into several small realms. There were no records about this in the ancient books he had searched in Fonglin County, including the records of the Wind Smell Pavilion. For fear of being suspected, Chu Xiu did not ask Lu Sanjin and Yin Lingzi. Both of them should know. If he could see a real martial immortal now, Chu Xiu would be able to roughly infer the level of existence in this realm. The whole place was bustling for a while, and after a while, it suddenly quieted down. A large number of High Heaven sect disciples in white came out, led by an old man and a middle-aged man in silver-white Qilin radiant armor. Lu Sanjin introduced, "The old man is the previous sect master of High Heaven sect, Qin Baiyuan, and the one in the armor is the current number 1 general of High Heaven sect, the battle god monarch, Immortal Linghu, who is responsible for guarding High Heaven sect. This is not an ordinary person. High Heaven sect is the most important cultivation paradise in High Heaven sect, and High Heaven sect also contains all the historical books and other precious items of High Heaven sect. It can even be said that High Heaven sect's sect master can die in battle, but Immortal Linghu is the last barrier guarding High Heaven sect. If he dies, High Heaven sect will be destroyed." Chu Xiu touched his chin. He did not ask much, but he had roughly estimated the strength of High Heaven sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion. There were 2 martial immortals in Imperial Sky Pavilion, the previous Pavilion Master and the current Pavilion Master, Li Wuxiang. On the other hand, High Heaven sect was able to suppress the Royal Sky Pavilion. They had already sent out 2 martial immortals, and their sect master had yet to come out. Furthermore, after seeing the 2 people before him, Chu Xiu was finally certain that the 4 people he had guessed were all martial immortal level existences. At least from the aura that Chu Xiu sensed, Zhong Xinxiu's strength was absolutely stronger than the 2 present. It was simply unfathomable. Jun Wuxian's strength was also much stronger than the old Qin Baiyuan. In terms of pure aura, he was almost on par with Linghu Xianshan. Of course, this was only Chu Xiu's judgment based on his own senses. There would be a lot of mistakes. If they really fought, it was still unknown who was stronger between Linghu Immortal Mountain and Jun Wuxian. But thinking about it this way was a little scary. Previously, Chu Xiu had thought that the difference in strength between the lower realm and the Daoist was that the Daoist were stronger. This had nothing to do with the person, but the environment. But now, he realized that the waters of the lower realm were deeper than Chu Xiu had imagined. If one could step into the martial immortal realm in a place like the lower realm, how strong would he be after coming to the Daoist? At this time, after the people of High Heaven sect exchanged a few words, the sermon was about to begin. This time, the person giving the sermon was Qin Baiyuan. In fact, most of the Daoist cultivators who gave sermons were powerful and prestigious older cultivators like Qin Baiyuan. In terms of combat power, they might not be as strong as Linghu Immortal Mountain, who was in his prime, but in terms of comprehension of the martial Dao, they were undoubtedly stronger than the other party. Qin Baiyuan walked to the center of the terrace, sat cross-legged on the ground, and said, "The way of martial Dao is to reach the heavens and enter the earth. It is to cultivate oneself and comprehend the heavens and earth." In the past sermons, some things have been said too many times. This old man wants to say something new this time. Looking around, Qin Baiyuan said in a deep voice, "Today, what I want to talk about is the way of fighting." As soon as these words came out, everyone present showed a look of interest. Many people knew that High Heaven sect's combat power was very strong. Therefore, the way of fighting explained by the masters of High Heaven sect aroused their interest even more. Fighters fight against each other and dance with weapons in hand. When martial artists fight and kill, their control over their martial skills and the changes in their mental state are all extremely important. Qin Baiyuan was obviously very proficient in teaching this kind of thing, so he spoke with confidence and assurance on the terrace. The others also listened with great interest, but after listening for a while, Chu Xiu shook his head gently. It was not that Chu Xiu was arrogant and could not even bear to listen to the sermon of a martial immortal, but rather that what Qin Baiyuan said was of no use to Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu's strength was obtained from slaughtering his way through bloody storms. If it was the Tao of battle, then he wasn't inferior to others. The only difference was that he could fight, but he couldn't speak with confidence and composure like Qin Baiyuan. Moreover, he also found that it was no wonder the Daoist cultivators were so keen on teaching. In fact, they did not have any real goods to offer. It was like someone telling you that you could succeed as long as you worked hard, and then casually giving you a few examples. However, when you tried to do it, you would find that the key was not whether you worked hard or not, but how you should work hard. This kind of sermon would not reveal the secrets of the sect, and it could also gain fame, so why not? Of course, it did not exclude the possibility that some masters might really have some real goods to offer. Qin Baiyuan spoke for a full hour. When he was done, he looked at the Imperial Sky Pavilion side and said calmly, "Vice Pavilion Master, I've said what I wanted to say. Let's not waste any more time. Who's going to go first in the martial arts competition?" Zhong Qiushui waved his hand, and a tall cultivator with a slightly arrogant expression walked to the center of the arena. Chu Xiu suddenly realized that the disciples of the Daoist sects did not seem to be small, but there were not many who were as modest and polite as Yin Lingzi. This was also related to the environment of the Daoist. The territory was vast, and most of the cultivators who traveled the Jianghu were actually in their own territory. There were too few incidents and dangers, and no matter where they went, there would be people who would treat them well. It was not strange for them to develop such a temperament. In the lower world, the geniuses on the dragon and tiger list like Chu Xiu had been fighting with all kinds of people since they were young. They had experienced the struggle between cultivators and Buddhists, the struggle between righteous and demonic, and the intrigue between aristocratic families. Everyone knew that there was always someone better out there, so they could not be arrogant even if they wanted to. High Heaven's sect also waved their hands and someone immediately came down to fight. Chu Xiu glanced at the two people fighting and felt that they were not very interesting. Most cultivators in the same realm as the Daoist were actually weaker than those from the lower world in a real battle. With the strength of these two people, forget Chu Xiu, even cultivators who had just entered the true fire soul refining realm like Chu Wuji or Lu Fengxian could easily deal with them. Of course, the only thing shocking about them was their age. The two fought for less than a quarter of an hour before the cultivator from the Royal Sky Pavilion was defeated. The martial Tao of the High Heavens sect was very similar to that of the Royal Sky Pavilion. They were both the type that was fierce and imposing to the extreme. Therefore, when the two sides fought, they mainly competed in terms of strength. In the second round, Zhong Qiushui waved his hand and the person who came up was Huang Ju, who had been punched by Chu Xiu and vomited blood. Although this guy had been punched by Chu Xiu before, there were still many precious medicinal pills in the Royal Sky Pavilion. He had recovered in a few days. Seeing Huang Ju come up, Xianyuan Wushuang from the High Heaven sect was stunned. Previously, Xianyuan Wushuang thought that the Royal Sky Pavilion would let the strongest person defeat the weakest person on their side and then use a piece of trash to fight with him. Who would have thought that they would leave the successor of the ancient venerable to him? Had they given up on treating him, or had they overestimated the so-called successor of the ancient venerable? Xianyuan Wushuang chuckled and did not think about it anymore. Anyway, in his opinion, as long as he went up, the result was destined. There was nothing to worry about. At this time, Huang Ju had already fought with the warriors of the High Heaven sect. It was no wonder that Lu Sanjin had warned Chu Xiu about how troublesome Huang Ju was. Although Huang Ju's foundation was far inferior to Chu Xiu's, his battle prowess was not weak. He had directly suppressed Chu Xiu and defeated him in 15 minutes. With one win and one loss, Xianyuan Wushuang snorted and said, "Trash." According to his original plan, although it was the best of three, the rule was that he had to fight in all 3 rounds. Therefore, he had to win all 3 rounds. He did not expect that before he met Chu Xiu, his side had already lost one. The defeated disciple of the High Heaven sect was angry, but he did not dare to say anything. In the stands, Qin Baiyuan frowned and said, "Wushuang needs to change his character. He needs to treat his own people more gently. Why does he have to act like an enemy? If he continues like this, how can he convince the public if the High Heaven sect is handed over to him in the future?" Linghu Xianshan said lightly, "Since he can't be the sect master of the High Heaven sect, he can follow me and be the gatekeeper. Isn't it better to guard the High Heaven sect and not have to deal with those intrigues?" Qin Baiyuan smiled bitterly. Although the gatekeeper of the High Heaven sect was equally important, the sect master who commanded the entire High Heaven sect was undoubtedly the most important. When the third round began, Xianyuan Wushuang stepped onto the high platform, which immediately caused a burst of discussion. Not to mention the entire East Territory, even in the entire Daoist, Xianyuan Wushuang had a great reputation. Of course, there was a mixture of praise and criticism. When Chu Xiu also stepped onto the platform, everyone was stunned. Who was he? Was he a new disciple of the Imperial Sky Pavilion? When the identity of Chu Xiu was announced, everyone realized that he was the successor of Gu Zun. Since the incident in Cold River City, it was not uncommon for foreign elders to represent their own disciples. Therefore, it was normal for Chu Xiu to represent the Imperial Sky Pavilion in the competition. However, everyone was also wondering about Chu Xiu's identity. Which successor of Gu Zun was he? In ancient times, there were not many Gu Zun who cultivated in seclusion in the mountains and forests, but there were still quite a few of them. Moreover, they would send their disciples into the Jianghu every few days. Therefore, those big sects knew the names of most of the Gu Zun. However, it was strange that the Imperial Sky Pavilion did not announce Chu Xiu's successor. Chapter 11:10. Although the Imperial Sky Pavilion did not explain the inheritance of Chu Xiu, since they had sent such a successor of the ancient venerables, his strength should not be weak. To be precise, every successor of the ancient venerables who stepped into the Jianghu was not weak. Of course, this was only for ordinary warriors. For a big sect like the High Heaven sect, whatever the successors of the ancient venerables had, they also had, and whatever the successors of the ancient venerables did not have. In such an environment, the disciples taught by the High Heaven sect would not be weaker than the successors of the ancient venerables. Xianyuan Wuxuang stepped onto the terrace, looked at Chu Xiu, shook his head, and said, "It's a pity that you finally made such a wrong decision. But you're also lucky, because you can't use too much force in the martial arts practice." Lu Sanjin, that idiot, couldn't control his anger and used too much force. As a result, he was reprimanded and punished. Why bother? It's not a glorious thing to show off your power to the weak. Don't worry, it will be solved soon. When the others heard Xianyuan Wuxuang's words, they all had different expressions on their faces. Although they had long heard that this genius disciple of the High Heaven sect was a little strange, they had never expected him to be so strange. Chu Xiu also frowned. He was not so easily provoked, but facing a guy like Xianyuan Wuxuang at this time, his patience was almost at its limit. The moment Chu Xiu unsheathed the formation-breaking saber in his hand, the surrounding essence of heaven and earth was turned into the extreme yin force along with the saber's sharpness. Perhaps it had something to do with the rich essence of heaven and earth in the Daoist Ocean, but Chu Xiu also found that his formation-breaking saber had changed after coming to the Daoist Ocean, and the essence of heaven and earth seemed to be stronger. Lu Sanjin, who was in the spectator stands, raised his eyebrows. Indeed, Chu Xiu was most proficient in saber techniques. Xianyuan Wuxuang showed a confident smile and said, "Your saber is good." As his voice fell, Xianyuan Wuxuang took a step forward, and a dazzling gang qi burst out from his body. Almost in the blink of an eye, Xianyuan Wuxuang absorbed almost all the essence of the world within a radius of 1,000 feet. All of it was under his control, making Xianyuan Wuxuang as dazzling as the sun. Everyone at the scene was shocked as they discussed among themselves. Xianyuan Wuxuang was born without meridians and should have been a waste. In the end, he relied on this kind of aptitude to forcefully create a cultivation method that was most suitable for him. At this moment, when he attacked, his strength and foundation were simply terrifying. Even some of the experts in the profound enlightenment realm could not guarantee that they could control more heaven and earth energy than Xianyuan Wuxuang. The difference between a peerless genius and a lunatic trash resulted in Xianyuan Wuxuang. Like a blazing sun falling from the sky, a powerful force directly crushed towards Chu Xiu. When dealing with most people, Xianyuan Wuxuang did not bother to waste so much energy and directly used the simplest means to crush them. However, this time he was facing Chu Xiu, the successor of the ancient master, so he used a little more strength. Narrowing his eyes, Chu Xiu chopped down with the formation-breaking saber in his hand. In an instant, the sharp light was dazzling. Time seemed to have stopped in an instant. Chu Xiu's saber traveled through time and space, and the people present did not even blink. But the next moment, Chu Xiu's saber had already appeared in front of Xianyuan Wuxuang. Under this saber, everything could be broken. The sharpness of saber principle was exerted to the extreme by Chu Xiu's saber. With the formation-breaking saber as the center, everything in the world seemed to be divided into two halves. The powerful gang qi was neatly torn, and the blazing sun was divided. Xianyuan Wuxuang's eyes were full of shock and disbelief. He had never expected that the guy in front of him was so strong, so strong. In a hurry, he shouted and pinched the incantation with his hands. The silver gang qi turned into talismans and condensed into the shadow of a divine gate in midair. High Sky Southern Gate. The power of the divine gate was solid and heavy, reaching the sky and the earth. But the saber move made by Chu Xiu could be said to be the extreme of his saber principle. This saber move perfectly combined the red dust cut with the saber essence of the breaking formula. How could it be so easy to resist? With a violent explosion, the whole terrace shook. The formation pattern on it shone with a golden light and blocked the impact of this force. When the storm of gang qi dissipated, the people found that Chu Xiu was still standing there, while Xianyuan Wushuang was directly sent flying by Chu Xiu's saber move. Seeing this scene, the people present suddenly burst into an uproar, their eyes full of disbelief. Although they were all speechless about Xianyuan Wushuang's character, Xianyuan Wushuang's strength was well known throughout the East Domain, even the whole Daoist. But as soon as they started fighting, he was sent flying by Chu Xiu's saber move. What kind of monster was Chu Xiu? Lu Sanjin's mouth opened wide, and then he glanced at Huang Ju. At this time, Huang Ju's face was a little pale, and he even secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, when Chu Xiu fought with him last time, he used his fists instead of his saber. Otherwise, even the 9 revolutions divine pill would not be able to save him. At the top of the high heaven sect stand, Qin Baiyuan frowned and said, "Where did this little guy come from? How can he be so strong? Why do I feel that his saber move is so familiar? I seem to have seen it in an ancient book." Linghu Xianshan waved his hand and asked someone to find detailed information about Chu Xiu. He said indifferently, "It's normal for him to be the successor of Gu Zun. Those guys have been cooped up in the mountains and forests for so many years and paid such a high price. There are always people who are lucky enough to find and cultivate a few outstanding people. Meng Xinghe is one of them." As they spoke, someone brought over Chu Xiu's information. It was extremely detailed. After reading it, Linghu Xianshan shook his head and said, "He is the successor of Gu Zun and has been recognized by Spiritual Treasure Temple and Imperial Sky Pavilion. It seems that his background is not small. However, after being defeated, he won't reveal his name until he gets revenge. Who is this hypocritical guy? Although those Gu Zun have always been very hypocritical, it's really rare to see someone this hypocritical." Since he was recognized by Spiritual Treasure Temple and Imperial Sky Pavilion, Qin Baiyuan and Linghu Xianshan had no doubt about Chu Xiu's identity. Putting Imperial Sky Pavilion aside, Spiritual Treasure Temple had a good reputation among the many Daoist forces. With Yin Lingzi's confirmation, nobody would suspect that Chu Xiu was a fake. Looking at the ring, Qin Baiyuan said with a frown, "However, this little guy's strength is so terrifying. The outcome of this battle is still unknown." Linghu Xianshan said indifferently, "It's no big deal if you lose. It's okay to lose for a while, but don't lose for the rest of your life." Qin Baiyuan sighed and said, "I'm afraid that Wushuang will take things too hard and suffer a blow to his mental state." Linghu Xianshan's mouth twitched as he said, "So what if his mental state is suffering a blow to his mental state? Even if his character changes greatly, can it be worse than it is now?" Qin Baiyuan was stunned. Then, he smiled bitterly. It was true. Xianyuan Wushuang's character was already so bad. Even if he changed again, how much worse could it be? In the ring, Xianyuan Wushuang climbed up from the smoke and dust. His eyes were filled with anger and disbelief. He was furious that he had actually suffered a loss at Chu Xiu's hands, and he did not dare to believe that the fellow before him was actually so powerful. "Good. Very good. Very good. You've successfully irritated me. I didn't intend to use my full strength to avoid hurting you by accident and being punished like that idiot Lu Sanjin. But now that you've successfully irritated me." Before Xianyuan Wushuang finished his words, Chu Xiu moved and chopped down again with his saber. It was still the combination of ethereal cut and breaking formula. The powerful saber intent that seemed to be able to break the world immediately made Xianyuan Wushuang swallow the rest of his words. This guy's mouth was so annoying that Chu Xiu did not want to listen to him anymore. Xianyuan Wushuang looked solemn. As he waved his hands, the powerful essence of the world was completely controlled by him. On both sides, the essence of the world was held in his hands like 2 huge dragons. They intertwined with each other and roared, tearing at Chu Xiu. The saber intent of the breaking formula tore everything in front of him, but the 2 huge dragons of essence overlapped with each other, and the spiral chi kept wearing down the power of Chu Xiu's saber. At this time, Xianyuan Wushuang took out his weapon from the space secret box. It was an extremely gorgeous halberd. A golden dragon coiled around the body of the halberd, and the crescent blade shone with a dazzling light. This high heaven dragon halberd was specially made for Xianyuan Wushuang by high heaven sect with countless rare materials and an ancient venerable who was good at forging and refining weapons, when Xianyuan Wushuang became the number one among the younger generation of high heaven sect. There were only a few warriors in the entire high heaven sect who could receive such treatment. Holding the high heaven dragon halberd, Xianyuan Wushuang was surrounded by silver gangqi. He looked like an ancient demon god, with golden and silver light intertwining. When the halberd smashed down, it collided with Chu Xiu's breaking formation. Suddenly, a stronger power fluctuation broke out. Even the ground under their feet, which could withstand the pressure of experts in the metaphysic realm, could not bear this power and began to crack. Chu Xiu's physical strength and gang qi power had reached the extreme of the same realm. Although Xianyuan Wushuang's physical strength was slightly inferior to Chu Xiu's, he was born without meridians. The gang qi power had penetrated into his flesh and bones, and his gang qi power was even more majestic than Chu Xiu's. For a moment, the two were in a deadlock. Xianyuan Wushuang said coldly, "I told you, it's you who forced me to use my full strength." Before he finished his words, an extremely cold force of extreme yin broke out and wrapped Xianyuan Wushuang in it. The next moment, the world-extinguishing fire burned fiercely and wrapped Xianyuan Wushuang in it. Holding the saber in his right hand, Chu Xiu slammed his left palm down. The majestic demon qi gathered and turned into a huge palm print of dozens of meters, directly blasting Xianyuan Wushuang away. Heavenly Demon Palm. Chapter 11:11. Chu Xiu had found many martial arts techniques in the things left by Dugu Weiwei. Unfortunately, they were not killing moves like the mortal world ethereal cut. They were all martial arts techniques used by Dugu Weiwei before he dominated the whole Jianghu. Chu Xiu did not learn these martial arts techniques seriously, but he knew a little about them. Maybe he could use them in the future, like the heavenly demonic palm. However, what shocked people was not Chu Xiu's heavenly demonic palm, but the world-annihilating fire. In the human world, no one recognized the world-annihilating fire. After Chu Xiu used it, it had become one of Chu Xiu's symbols. But in the Daoist world, the world-annihilating fire was a secret cultivation method of the Mahakala palace of the Sanskrit sect in the western region, which was mysterious and unpredictable. The Sanskrit sect never accepted outer disciples, and Chu Xiu did not seem to be a monk. How could he use the world-annihilating fire? Linghu Xianshan said faintly, according to the information just now, the inheritance of Chu Xiu's lineage can be traced back to before the Great Ancient Tribulation. Maybe the cultivation method of the Sanskrit sect was leaked at that time. In that period, it was normal. Qin Baiyuan also nodded. This kind of thing was not rare. Before the Great Ancient Tribulation, the whole world had been in a mess. In order to compete for the places to enter the Daoist world, various sects were even fighting against each other. In that period, not to mention the cultivation method being leaked, as long as it could save one's life, they could leave anything behind. However, in the field, Chu Xiu's sudden move caught Xianyuan Wushuang by surprise. Xianyuan Wushuang had always thought that Chu Xiu's martial arts was the same as his, which was fierce and imposing. Who would have thought that Chu Xiu would turn around and use the extremely evil world-annihilating fire? The destructive fire burned his gang qi and primordial spirit, which immediately made Xianyuan Wushuang embarrassed. As a result, he was sent flying by Chu Xiu's slap. His anger had risen to the extreme. Previously, he was still saying that those who couldn't control their anger were weaklings, but now, it was his turn to be the one who couldn't control his anger. This time, Xianyuan Wushuang did not say anything. He held the high heaven dragon subduing halberd tightly with both hands. Strange patterns loomed all over his body, and the force of heaven and earth crazily poured into his body. If it were an ordinary person, this would simply be a self-explosion, but Xianyuan Wushuang forcibly absorbed all the essence of heaven and earth into his body. Feeling that power, Chu Xiu's expression changed slightly. Pure devil qi appeared in his hand, and he shot out 3 city-destroying arrows in succession, trying to stop Xianyuan Wushuang from absorbing the essence qi of heaven and earth. However, the strange patterns in front of Xianyuan Wushuang blocked the arrows before they fell, using the purest primordial qi to purify the force of nirvana on the 3 city-destroying arrows. The next moment, Xianyuan Wushuang was surrounded by the dazzling golden primordial qi. He made a gesture and shouted, "Please enter my body with the fighting soul." In an instant, some kind of power seemed to be triggered. The next moment, the devil qi in the air crazily poured into Xianyuan Wushuang's body. Behind him, a hazy phantom of hundreds of meters high appeared, wearing black dragon armor and holding halberd. Its devil flame was monstrous, and its power was extremely terrifying. A hint of surprise appeared in the eyes of the others. Xianyuan Wushuang had actually gone all out. To be precise, what Xianyuan Wushuang used was beyond the scope of martial skills. It was a secret skill obtained by the High Heaven sect in the past. It could use something inherited from the primordial demon god to guide the demon god's brand into one's body in exchange for great power. This secret skill originated from some extinct ancient barbarian tribes. The High Heaven sect modified it by using the personal items left by the experts in the past to arouse the will imprinted in heaven and earth. It was called Fighting Soul Technique. When one reached the peak of the martial immortal realm, he was truly a powerful existence comparable to heaven and earth. Since the power of Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago could be imprinted in the void, other legendary experts could naturally do the same. However, the premise was that the power of the imprint left by the experts at this level would cause a strong backlash after entering one's body, even if it was activated by the personal items. Therefore, after the Fighting Soul Technique was developed, it was basically shelved. In the history of the High Heaven sect, no more than 3 people could successfully cultivate it. Xianyuan Wushuang was so talented that he directly nourished the fighting soul into his body with the powerful world Yuan Qi. Everyone else was shocked. Only Chu Xiu had a strange expression on his face. He recognized the fighting soul that Xianyuan Wushuang had attracted. The primordial demon god, Marquis Lu Wenhou. As a fierce and powerful great demon god in the past, Marquis Lu Wenhou, who could be besieged by all the martial artists in the world. What he had done could even be compared with Dugu Weiwei. Of course, he was qualified to be attracted as a fighting soul. But now, the inheritance of Marquis Lu Wenhou was with him, Chu Xiu. In the past, after Lu Fengxian obtained the inheritance of Marquis Lu Wenhou, she had given Chu Xiu Marquis Lu Wenhou's body-refining cultivation method, 9 Heavens Devil Golden Body. Chu Xiu had also cultivated this cultivation method to the profound realm. Now, Xianyuan Wushuang had attracted Marquis Lu Wenhou's fighting soul to fight with him. Who was the fake one? The silver gang qi around Xianyuan Wushuang had disappeared and was replaced by the deep devil qi. He stared at Chu Xiu and said coldly, "Good, very good. In the East region, no one has been able to force me to this point for many years. You should feel honored." "Really?" Chu Xiu put away the broken formation and walked forward step by step. With every step, the devil qi around him became stronger. In the end, Chu Xiu's surroundings were already filled with demonic flames, roasting his powerful physical body. Waves of trembling energy burst out from his body. Some experts with good eyesight had noticed that the aura exuded by Chu Xiu was exactly the same as that of Xianyuan Wushuang after the fighting soul had been attracted into his body. No, to be precise, the devil qi around him was even purer than that of Xianyuan Wushuang. After all, the devil qi around Xianyuan Wushuang was just some devil qi that was automatically absorbed from the surrounding heaven and earth after the Marquis Lu Wenhou's fighting soul was drawn into his body. The devil qi around Chu Xiu was formed after he cultivated the 9 Heavens Devil Golden Body to the profound realm. Xianyuan Wushuang naturally felt this aura, and even the fighting soul in his body began to become unstable. He was stunned and did not know what was going on. But at this time, Chu Xiu had already rushed over and punched. The devil flame around him was monstrous, and the fist intent seemed to tear everything apart. Xianyuan Wushuang lifted halberd and was about to fight, but the shadow of Marquis Lu Wenhou behind him was constantly trembling. Not only did it not exert the power of the fighting soul technique, but it even dragged him down, making his movements extremely slow. He needed to spend a large part of his energy to suppress the restless fighting soul in his body, so he was directly blown away by Chu Xiu's punch. Chu Xiu's figure did not stop moving. He was also very good at close-range combat. After a series of attacks, Xianyuan Wushuang was basically beaten up and had no power to fight back. In fact, his performance was not as good as before. In fact, Xianyuan Wushuang was also unlucky. He came from the High Heaven sect and had many trump cards, not just the fighting soul technique. If he had fought with Chu Xiu honestly, even if he was defeated in the end, he would not be so embarrassed. But he was unlucky enough to use the fighting soul technique, and it happened to trigger the imprint of Marquis Lu Wenhou, so he could not blame Chu Xiu for being ruthless. Marquis Lu Wenhou had died long ago, and the last bit of his true spirit had been absorbed by Lu Fengxian. Therefore, the imprint he left was just an instinct. Since it could be affected by his personal item and guided here, it would naturally be affected by his old cultivation method, and even more so. After being suppressed to the extreme by Chu Xiu, Xianyuan Wushuang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets, as if he had gone crazy. As Qin Baiyuan had worried before, Xianyuan Wushuang had never lost before. If he lost this time, it would definitely have an impact on his state of mind. Now, Xianyuan Wushuang was not completely defeated, but he was suppressed to such an extent in front of so many people, which had gradually blurred his mind. The next moment, Xianyuan Wushuang blocked Chu Xiu's punch with halberd. He made a seal with his hands, and in an instant, his aura suddenly contracted. The next moment, the shadow of Marquis Lu Wenhou behind him began to explode. It was not exploding, but a powerful explosion caused by his aura. Chu Xiu's face suddenly changed. What a lunatic. Xianyuan Wushuang was not only mentally ill, but also a lunatic. Seeing that he could not control the fighting soul, he directly detonated it in his body. Just now, Xianyuan Wushuang had guided the powerful essence of heaven and earth into his body, which shocked even Chu Xiu. He had absorbed this power into his body, and then detonated it together with the fighting soul. What did he want to do? Did he want to die together with Chu Xiu? Last time in the martial arts competition, Lu Sanjin had been punished because he had severely injured his opponent. This time, Xianyuan Wushuang directly turned the martial arts competition into a life-and-death fight. Xianyuan Wushuang wanted to fight to the death, but Chu Xiu did not want to die with him. The next moment, Chu Xiu suddenly began to retreat, and Xianyuan Wushuang followed him with a grim smile. However, as Chu Xiu retreated, he made a seal with his hands. In an instant, countless cold auras gathered around Chu Xiu. Pure demon qi lingered around him, and the cries of ghosts and deities descended from the void. The sky was crying blood rain, and the void was directly torn apart. The demon god's shadow looked down indifferently and reached out a hand to grab Xianyuan Wushuang, trying to pull him into the boundless gloomy world. At this moment, the warriors of High Heaven sect on the platform finally could not sit still. Qin Baiyuan took a step forward and arrived on the balcony. With a tap of his hand, the soaring firmament southern heavenly gate appeared and sealed Chu Xiu's demon wailing heaven great compassion mantra, causing the demon god's shadow to be completely destroyed. The next moment, he pointed at Xianyuan Wushuang several times, making him groan and faint, but also calmed the power that was about to explode in his body. Qin Baiyuan looked at Chu Xiu and said coldly, condensing the natural evil demon qi in the world to the extreme, what a vicious cultivation method. Didn't the Imperial Sky Pavilion tell you that you don't need to kill your opponent in the martial arts competition? Chapter 11-12. Xianyuan Wushuang could lose, but he couldn't die. After all, he was the most outstanding disciple of this generation of High Heaven sect. In terms of martial Dao talent and cultivation, Xianyuan Wushuang was unparalleled even in the entire history of High Heaven sect. Therefore, even though there was a rule that the older generation warriors were not allowed to participate in the martial arts exhibition, the disciples of High Heaven sect were all crippled by Lu Sanjin in the last martial arts exhibition, but High Heaven sect did not participate in it. However, this time, Qin Baiyuan really could not bear it, because this person was Xianyuan Wushuang. Chu Xiu said lightly, "Senior of High Heaven Sect, you have to be reasonable when you speak and do things. With so many eyes watching, it's not that I want to kill him, but that someone is crazy and wants to drag me down with him. He wants to die, but I don't. Do I need to say who killed him first?" Qin Baiyuan stared at Chu Xiu for a long time, then finally snorted coldly and said, "My High Heaven Sect lost this time's competition." Although High Heaven Sect's methods were overbearing, they were not unreasonable. In front of so many people, a loss was a loss, and their High Heaven Sect could afford to lose. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and was about to leave when he suddenly felt that someone was staring at him meaningfully. But when Chu Xiu looked back, he found that everyone was looking at him. It was understandable that Chu Xiu could defeat Xianyuan Wushuang. After all, although Xianyuan Wushuang was strong, no one said that he was the top expert of the younger generation of Daoist. But Chu Xiu's combat strength was amazing. Even among the descendants of prime venerables who had appeared in recent years, few could compete with him, so it was normal that he was the focus of everyone's attention at this time. Chu Xiu frowned slightly. He could sense that the gaze from before was very different from the gazes of the others. It was obvious that there was something strange about it. However, there were too many people present, so Chu Xiu couldn't distinguish it. He could only secretly raise his guard. Lu Sanjin came over excitedly and pulled Chu Xiu along. He laughed and said, "Ha ha ha. Brother Chu's strength is really extraordinary." Xianyuan Wushuang was unable to fight back. Unfortunately, that guy actually fainted. Otherwise, would really like to see his expression. "Speaking of which, I'm really lucky to be able to meet you, Brother Chu." Lu Sanjin really thought that he was very lucky. If he did not happen to be near Fonglin County, the Emperor's Sky Pavilion would not have sent him to handle this matter. If it wasn't for Yinlingzi's timely appearance, he would have definitely fallen out with Chu Xiu. Perhaps, they would have already started fighting. After all, this guy's behavior at the beginning was indeed suspicious. If he had not been thick-skinned enough to convince Chu Xiu to join the Imperial Sky Pavilion as their guest, he would not be where he was today. With so many coincidences put together, Lu Sanjin could be said to be extremely lucky. Chu Xiu smiled faintly and said, "It's just luck." He wasn't being humble. He was really lucky. Xianyuan Wushuang's strength was not that weak, and the battle's soul technique was not his only trump card. However, he was so unlucky that he chose to use the battle's soul technique and attracted the mark left by Marquis Lu Wenho, which was simply a chance for Chu Xiu. Otherwise, Chu Xiu would not have won so easily, even though he was confident that he would not be defeated if he had fought in a different way. What happened next was simple. The High Heaven Sect lost in this martial arts competition. Not only did they lose some natural treasures, but they also lost some conditions to the Imperial Sky Pavilion. As for what these conditions were, it was up to Zhong Qiushui and the others to negotiate. Even Lu Sanjin was not qualified to listen, let alone Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu stayed with the Imperial Sky Pavilion in High Heaven City for a few more days. When everything was settled, he followed Lu Sanjin and the others back to the headquarters of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Yinlingzi said goodbye to them and continued to travel around the Daoist continent. Like the High Heaven Sect, the Imperial Sky Pavilion had a giant city of its own. This seemed to be the habit of these sects when they first came to the Daoist continent. At that time, the Daoist continent had not been exploited, so there were fierce beasts everywhere. Building such a giant city could also protect some young cultivators. Compared with High Heaven City, the giant city where the headquarters of the Imperial Sky Pavilion was located was much more ordinary, but only in comparison to High Heaven City. In fact, the Imperial Sky Pavilion was built on the top of a mountain that was thousands of meters high, and there was only a nearly vertical mountain road leading to the top. The giant city on the top of the mountain was also very eye-catching, and it could even be seen from dozens of kilometers away. When Chu Xiu and others arrived at the gate of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, someone was already waiting to greet them. It was the pavilion master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, Heavenly King Li Wuxiang. Li Wuxiang was worthy of his title. He was tall and mighty, and his face was dignified and solemn. Just by looking at him, he gave off a very dignified feeling. When Li Wuxiang saw that Lu Sanjin and the others had returned, a smile appeared on his face. He said, "Very good. You guys did pretty well this time. Our Imperial Sky Pavilion has lost 3 consecutive martial arts demonstrations. We've finally won this round." Although Lu Sanjin had performed well in the last martial arts demonstration, the other 2 disciples of the Imperial Sky Pavilion did not perform well. The previous 2 times were even worse. At that time, Lu Sanjin had not yet risen, and the Imperial Sky Pavilion was almost beaten by High Heaven Sect. Zhong Qiushui just walked over and said lightly, "Pavilion Master, the conditions of High Heaven Sect have been discussed. They are quite efficient and did not shirk their responsibilities." Li Wuxiang nodded and said, "That's good." Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. The relationship between the Pavilion Master and Deputy Pavilion Master was very delicate. It was said that Li Wuxiang and Zhong Qiushui had a very good relationship before. They were the 2 heroes of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, and they were like brothers. In the end, a dispute over the position of Pavilion Master had escalated to this point. Of course, Chu Xiu was just watching the show and did not plan to delve too deeply into it. At this time, Li Wuxiang also looked at Chu Xiu and said with a smile, "You must be Chu, right? Chu represented my Imperial Sky Pavilion in winning the martial arts demonstration this time and can be said to be the greatest contributor to my Imperial Sky Pavilion. At the banquet, my Imperial Sky Pavilion will also reward you handsomely." Li Wuxiang's attitude was very good. He was courteous but did not lose his dignity, but Chu Xiu could see a bit of inquisitiveness in his eyes. This was all normal, so Chu Xiu did not care. He just cupped his fists and said, "Since I have become an honored guest of Imperial Sky Pavilion, it is natural for me to take the money and work hard." Li Wuxiang gave Chu Xiu a few more words of encouragement before going off to greet the others. The banquet in the evening was actually just that. Although it was nominally a welcoming dinner for Lu Sanjin and the others, the atmosphere was very awkward. Zhong Qiushui, the Deputy Pavilion Master, was in charge of leading the team to participate in the martial arts demonstration, but his attitude was very cold. Moreover, Zhong Qiushui was not without a foundation in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Although he had a cold personality, he treated his own people very well. He was very generous, and when he gave pointers to his subordinates or disciples, he never hid anything. So even though he wasn't the Pavilion Master, there were many people who were willing to follow him. These people and Li Wuxiang, the Pavilion Master's people, were on opposite sides. The entire scene was as awkward as one could imagine. Chu Xiu did not mind. He was only concerned about the promise Lu Sanjin made to him, which was to bring him to meet the Imperial Sky Pavilion's old Pavilion Master and ask him about Dugu Weiwei. Lu Sanjin was quite reliable. The next morning, he came to look for Chu Xiu and said that he had already spoken to the old Pavilion Master and that Chu Xiu could ask him any time. Seeing Lu Sanjin's rather excited expression, Chu Xiu asked, "Brother Lu, are you very close to the old Pavilion Master?" Lu Sanjin nodded and said, "Everyone in the Imperial Sky Pavilion thinks that I'm the Pavilion Master's man, but in fact, I'm the old Pavilion Master's man. Although I don't like Xianyuan Wushuang, I have to admit that he's indeed more talented than me. It's not an exaggeration to say that he's 100 times more talented than me. In the past, I was just an ordinary disciple in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. It's all thanks to the old Pavilion Master who picked me out and gave me a chance that I'm in this position today. The Pavilion Master trusts me because he knows how I feel about the old Pavilion Master. The reason I'm helping the Pavilion Master wholeheartedly is also because he was chosen by the old Pavilion Master. These things were not secrets in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Therefore, Lu Sanjin spoke about them directly. He was the one who invited Chu Xiu to the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a foreign advisor. Naturally, there was no need for him to hide these things. The old Pavilion Master's secluded residence was on a cliff in the corner of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Perhaps old people did not like things that were too luxurious. Chu Xiu had been to the old celestial master's thatched cottage. It was very ordinary. The old pavilion master's secluded residence was also an ordinary quadrangle of a farmer's house. However, it was next to a cliff. "Old pavilion master, I've brought him here," Lu Sanjin said as he pushed open the door of the quadrangle. He seemed very casual. Inside the courtyard house, an old man with white hair and a sackcloth robe was sitting on a recliner, reading a book. When he saw the two of them enter, he waved his hand, and without the slightest bit of stellar energy leaked out, the breeze seemed to have a mind of its own as it carried two praying mats to their feet. The old pavilion master smiled and said, "You're here. Take a seat." Chu Xiu cupped his hands together and said, "Greetings, old pavilion master." The old pavilion master nodded. He looked at Chu Xiu and said, "Not bad, not bad. I've met Xianyuan Wushuang once. Although he's extremely arrogant, he's indeed a genius. It's not easy for you to defeat him. The ancestor of your line should be proud of you." Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "However, my master has an obsession, and so do I. If I don't defeat the successor of my enemy, I won't even be able to tell the name of my line to others. It's a disgrace." Chu Xiu had gone to great lengths to meet the old pavilion master for this matter. Therefore, he did not beat around the bush and asked directly. The old pavilion master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion was already over 500 years old. He was also an expert in the martial immortal realm. He was someone who stood at the peak of the Daoist realm. If even the old pavilion master did not know anything about Dugu Weiwei, Chu Xiu would really be at a loss. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.